Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. They say you don't really know fear until it knows you. I didn't quite understand that saying until October 2001 when I was stationed at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My name is Emery Carpenter, and I've been a park ranger for almost 7 years now. I don't say this for any reason other than the fact that in those 7 years I've seen a lot. I'm not one for exaggerations, but I've watched people fall off cliffs, found hikers lost in the woods for days, and even helped relocate some black bears who got a little too comfortable raiding campgrounds. But nothing prepared me for what I stumbled across that autumn. Great Smoky is massive, you know, and beautiful too. You've got your ancient trees, waterfalls, fog-covered mountains. It's the kind of place people go to escape the noise of the world. It's also a place where you can get turned around real quick if you're not paying attention. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I got the call. I was just finishing up some paperwork in the ranger station, sipping on my third cup of coffee, when Carla, our dispatch officer, poked her head into my office. "Hey Emery, we've got a situation," she said, her usual cheerful tone tinged with concern. "We've got an overdue camper report. The guy is named Douglas Hartley. He's a mid-50s seasoned hiker. He's been out of touch for about 2 days." I nodded, reaching for the file she was holding out. "Standard stuff," I replied, flipping through the pages. Usually it's someone who wandered off the beaten path, twisted an ankle, or got turned around after dusk. But as I read further, my brow furrowed. "Wait, he wasn't alone?" Carla shook her head. "That's where it gets weird. He was camping with 2 friends, but neither of them have shown up in town for supplies like they were supposed to." I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "All right, I'll head out to check it out." "Which trailhead?" "They were last seen heading up the Appalachian Trail from Newfound Gap," Carla replied. "Hartley's truck is still in the parking lot there." As I headed out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the unusual silence in the woods that morning, or the way the mist seemed to cling to the trees more stubbornly than usual. Whatever it was, it set my nerves on edge. I'm not exactly the gun-toting type. I've always figured my voice as a good flashlight could get me out of most situations, and if not, well, that's what backup is for. But as I drove towards Newfound Gap, I found myself wishing I had more than just my standard issue gear. The parking lot was deserted when I arrived, except for a single truck parked crookedly in the dirt. Hartley's vehicle sat there like a lone gravestone, a silent testament to the missing hikers. I did a quick check of the truck, locked with no signs of forced entry or struggle, just an abandoned vehicle waiting for its owner's return. As I stepped onto the trail, the silence hit me again. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease. After all, I was here to find some lost hikers, not to get spooked by an unusually quiet forest. Little did I know as I set off down that familiar trail that I was walking into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The Appalachian Trail stretched before me, a ribbon of earth winding through the ancient forest. I'd walked this path countless times before, but never had it felt so wrong. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. 2 miles in, I came across the first sign of the missing hikers, a campsite nestled in a small clearing just off the main trail. But something was off. The fire pit was cold, ashes long since settled. The tent looked like it had been left in a hurry, its entrance flap torn and fluttering weakly in the barely there breeze. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert. "Hello," I called out, more out of protocol than any real expectation of an answer.
"Park Ranger, anyone here?"
Silence was my only reply. Stepping closer, I peered into the tent. Sleeping bags were unzipped and crumpled in a heap, as if their occupants had leapt up in a panic. A backpack lay on its side, contents spilled across the tent floor. Energy bars, a map, and a flashlight still switched on but with batteries long dead. I keyed my radio. "Carl, are you there? I found their campsite." Static crackled in response. I frowned, tapping the device. "Carla, do you copy?" Nothing. I pocketed the radio with a sigh. Reception could be spotty out here, but it was rarely this bad. Another detail to add to the growing list of things that felt off about this whole situation. As I continued to investigate the campsite, a chill ran down my spine. There were no footprints leading away from the site, no clear sign of which direction the hikers might have gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. But the most unsettling thing, the quiet. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never experienced anything like it. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. It was as if all wildlife had fled the area, leaving behind this eerie vacuum of sound. I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than usual, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers ready to snatch at any unwary passerby. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the forest in long shadows, I knew I had to make a decision. Standard procedure would be to mark the location and head back, returning with a search team at first light. But something in my gut told me that waiting wasn't an option. Whatever had happened to Hortley and his friends, I had a sinking feeling that time was of the essence. With a deep breath, I switched on my flashlight and stepped back onto the trail. The beam of light seemed feeble against the encroaching darkness, barely penetrating the thick canopy above. As I moved forward, deeper into the heart of the forest, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into the jaws of some ancient, patient predator. Little did I know, the true horrors of that night were just beginning to unfold. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the silence became. My flashlight beam danced across the trees, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Every snapping twig under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I had hiked another mile or so past the abandoned campsite when the first coppery whiff hit my nostrils. At first I thought I might be imagining it, a trick of the mind in the growing darkness. But as I pressed on, the scent grew stronger. Unmistakable, my heart began to race, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I swept the flashlight in a wide arc, searching for the source of that sickening feeling, and then the beam caught something. A flash of pale skin against the dark forest floor. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice sounding alien even to my own ears. There, crumpled at the base of a massive oak, was a body. As I approached, my stomach churning, I recognized him from the photos in the file, Douglas Hartley. But what I saw, nothing could have prepared me for it. Hartley's body was twisted in a way that defied natural anatomy, his head wrenched at an impossible angle. But that wasn't the worst of it. His left arm was gone, not severed, not cut. It was as if something had torn it straight from the socket. I've seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something else entirely. The violence of it, the sheer brutality, sent waves of nausea washing over me. I staggered back, fighting the urge to vomit. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio again. Carla, do you copy? I need backup now." Only static answered me. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something else. Rag marks in the soft earth, leading away from Hartley's body. And they were fresh. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run to the safety of my truck and call for reinforcements. But I knew I couldn't leave home, not when there might be survivors. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and followed the trail. It led me to a small clearing, and that's where I found the others. 2 more bodies in a state that made Hartley look peaceful by comparison. They had been torn apart, limbs scattered like discarded toys, deep gashes covered what remained of their torsos. But these weren't the marks of any animal I knew. The cuts were too precise, almost surgical in their placement. I knelt beside one of the victims, forcing myself to look closer. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide and staring, mouth open in a silent scream. Whatever had done this, these people had seen it coming. As I stood, my legs shaky and weak, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something. A shape, dark and low to the ground, slinking between the trees. Too fast to make out details, but large, bigger than any mountain lion I'd ever seen. The blood ran cold. Whatever had killed these people, it was still out there. And now it had noticed me. In that moment, I felt more human, more vulnerable than I ever had before. The forest that had been my workplace, my second home for years, suddenly became alien and hostile. Every shadow concealed a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves a harbinger of death. I took a step back, then another, and that's when I heard it. A low, rumbling growl seemed to come from everywhere, nowhere at once. It wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. It was deeper, almost guttural, with an intelligence behind it that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me at every step. But I didn't slow down. I could feel it behind me, not heard, but sensed. A malevolent presence closing in with every labored breath I took. As I ran, the forest seemed to come alive around me, shadows reaching out with grasping tendrils, the very trees themselves appearing to shift and move to block my path. Whether it was real or just my panic mind playing tricks, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I had to get out, had to reach my truck before whatever was hunting me caught up. The next few minutes were a blur of terror and exertion. Somehow I found myself back at the parking lot, my truck a blessed sight in the gathering gloom. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The growl I'd heard in the forest still echoed in my ears. As the engine roared to life and I peeled out of the lot, tires kicking up gravel, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. A pair of eyes reflecting the red glow of my taillights, watching from the tray line in human eyes filled with a cold, calculated hunger that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I'd like to say I did the right thing, that I went straight to the station, reported what I'd seen, organized a search party, but I didn't. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and sat there in the dark, shaking like a leaf, trying to make sense of what I just experienced. As the adrenaline wore off and exhaustion set in, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Whatever was out there in those woods, it wasn't finished, and somehow I knew it would be coming for me next. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those mangled bodies, heard that inhuman growl. The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it all. Maybe it was a bear, driven to unusual aggression by hunger or disease. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. What I'd seen out there was something else entirely. As the harsh rays of dawn crept through my windows, I finally mustered the courage to check my phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages, all from the ranger station. With trembling fingers, I dialed Carla's number. "Emery, where the hell have you been?" Her voice was a mixture of relief and anger. "I've been trying to reach you all night." My voice cracked and I had to clear my throat before continuing. "I found them, Carla," I said. "Carly and his friends. They're dead." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Carla spoke again, her voice was softer, laced with concern. What happened out there, Emery? I opened my mouth to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I describe the horror of what I'd seen, the bone-deep terror I'd felt? In the harsh light of day, it all seemed so surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't quite shake. I'm not sure. I finally managed. It was dark, and I need to come in and file a report. All right, Carla said, clearly not satisfied, but willing to wait for a full explanation. But Emery, there's something else you should know. We've had more reports come in. 2 more bodies were found by some hikers further up the trail. Same condition as Hartley and his friends, according to the preliminary reports. My blood ran cold. It wasn't over. Whatever was out there was still hunting. I arrived at the ranger station an hour later, having taken the time to shower and change. I hoped it would help me feel more like myself, more in control. It didn't. The station was a hive of activity. Park police, search and rescue teams, even a couple of suits that I guessed were from some higher law enforcement agency. All eyes turned to me as I walked in, conversations dying mid-sentence. Chief Ranger Hodges, a grizzled veteran of the Park Service, beckoned me into his office. As I sat down across from him, I could see the worry lines etched deep in his weathered face. "All right, Carpenter," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened out there. Leave nothing out." So I told him everything. The eerie silence in the woods, the abandoned campsite, the mutilated bodies. I described the creature I glimpsed, the terrifying chase through the darkened forest. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in Hodges' eyes slowly give way to concern or maybe even fear. When I finished, Hodges leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "Jesus, Emery," he muttered. "In all my years, I've never heard anything like this. What do we do, sir?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Hodges was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "We investigate. We treat this like any other incident. Gather evidence, interview witnesses, try to piece together what happened. But," he added, fixing me with a stern look, "we keep the details under wraps for now. No need to sort of panic." I nodded, relieved to have a plan of action, something to focus on besides the lingering terror. "One more thing," Hodges said as I stood to leave. "I'm assigning you a partner for this investigation. Riley Foster, one of our new transfers, fresh out of training but sharp as a tack. I think a set of unbiased eyes might be helpful here." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A young woman entered, her ranger uniform crisp and new. She had an air of eager competence about her, but as our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something else. Doubt, suspicion. "Ranger Foster, meet Emery Carpenter," Hodges said. "You two will be working this case together." As we shook hands, I couldn't help but wonder. Was Hodges assigning her to help me or to keep an eye on me? Either way, I had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a mystery that would push us both to the very limits of sanity and survival. Riley Foster and I spent the next few days combing through every scrap of evidence we could find. We revisited the crime scenes, now cordoned off with yellow police tape that seemed absurdly out of place in the ancient forest. The bodies had been removed, but the lingering sense of wrongness remained. "So this is where you saw it?" Riley asked as we stood at the edge of the clearing where I'd encountered the whatever it was. Her tone was neutral, but I could sense the underlying skepticism. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right over there, between those trees." Riley nodded, jotting something down in her notebook, "And you're sure it wasn't a bear or maybe a mountain lion?" I shook my head vehemently. "No way. This was something else, bigger, faster, and the way it moved, it was almost like it was intelligent." She raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't comment further. Instead, she knelt down, examining the ground where I'd seen the creature. "No tracks," she muttered, more to herself than to me. As we continued our investigation, interviewing local hikers and campers, a pattern began to emerge. People reported strange noises in the night, glimpses of something large moving through the trees, animals acting strangely, fleeing areas they normally inhabited, and always that oppressive silence that seemed to follow in the creature's wake. But hard evidence remained frustratingly elusive. No clear tracks, no fur or tissue samples, just the mutilated bodies and a growing sense of dread among the park staff and visitors. As the days wore on, I could feel the strain starting to show. I wasn't sleeping well, plagued by nightmares of those inhuman eyes watching me from the darkness. Every shadow, every unexpected sound made me jump. And I could tell Riley was starting to notice. "Emery," she said one evening as we were reviewing our notes back at the station, "are you sure you're okay to continue with this investigation? Maybe you should take some time off, get some rest." I bristled at the suggestion. "I'm fine," I snapped, perhaps more harshly than I intended. "We need to figure this out before anyone else gets hurt." Riley held up her hands in a placating gesture. Okay. I'm just concerned, that's all. You've been through a traumatic experience." I softened a bit at that. "I appreciate it, Riley, really, but I need to see this through." She nodded, then hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "There's something else. I've been doing some research into the history of the park, looking for any similar incidents. My interest peaked, and, well, nothing exactly like this. But there are stories, old legends from the Cherokee who used to inhabit these lands. They speak of a creature they called the Octina. Octina? The word felt strange on my tongue. Riley nodded. It's described as a kind of horned serpent or dragon. But here's the interesting part. Some accounts say it could shape-shift, take on different forms to lure its prey. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think that's what we're dealing with? Some kind of mythical creature?" She shrugged. "I'm not saying I believe in monsters, Emery, but something is out there, something that doesn't fit any normal explanation. I think we need to consider all possibilities, no matter how outlandish they might seem." As much as I wanted to dismiss the idea, I couldn't shake the feeling that Riley might be onto something. Whatever was stalking the forests of Great Smoky, it was far from ordinary. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. We rushed to the window to see a crowd gathering in the parking lot. At its center was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, gesticulating frantically as he spoke to Chief Hodges. "That's Warren Kemp," Riley said, recognition in her voice. Since our local guide been leading tours in the park for decades. We hurried outside to join the group. As we got closer, I could hear snippets of Warren's frantic speech. "Biggest damn thing I've ever seen, moved like lightning. I'm telling you, snatched up a full-grown deer like it was nothing." Hodges was trying to calm him down. "All right, Warren, take it easy. Start from the beginning. What exactly did you see?" Warren took a deep breath, his eyes darting nervously toward the tree line visible beyond the parking lot. "I was leading a group up near Klingman's Dome. We were on our way back down when we heard this awful sound, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Then we saw it." He paused, shuddering at the memory. "It was huge, Chief. Black as night, but wrong somehow. Like its shape kept shifting. It came out of nowhere, grabbed a deer that was grazing nearby, and disappeared back into the trees. My group, they all ran. I don't even know if they all made it back." As the crowd dispersed to carry out Hodges' orders, Riley pulled me aside. "This is escalating, Emery. Whatever's out there, it's getting bolder." I nodded grimly. "We need to end this before anyone else gets hurt." "How?" Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not equipped to deal with something like this." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew we had to do. "We go after it, tonight, just you and me." Haley's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? That's suicide." maybe, I admitted. But we can just sit back and wait for it to pick us off one by one. We know these woods better than anyone. We have a chance to end this here and now. For a long moment, Riley just stared at me. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We prepare, we plan, and Emery, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. We watch each other's backs. No heroics. Got it. As we headed back to the station to prepare for our night hunt, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our understanding. But we had no choice. The creature had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Little did we know the true horror of what awaited us in the depths of the forest would test not just our courage, but our very sanity. The sun was sinking below the horizon as Riley and I made our final preparations. We had armed ourselves as best we could, high-powered rifles, sidearms, enough ammunition to take down a small army. But as I checked and rechecked my gear, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that against whatever was out there, our weapons might as well be water pistols. Ready? Riley asked, her face a mask of determination that didn't quite hide the fear in her eyes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We slipped out of the ranger station, careful not to alert anyone to our unauthorized mission. The last thing we needed was Hodges trying to stop us, or worse, insisting on coming along. As we drove toward the trailhead where Warren had his encounter, the forest seemed to press in around us, darker and more menacing than I'd ever seen it. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers ready to snatch at any unwary passerby. We parked the truck and stepped out into the gathering gloom. The silence hit me immediately, that same unnatural quiet I'd experienced before. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of leaves under our boots. Jesus, Riley whispered, her eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. It's so quiet. Yeah, I replied, my voice barely audible. It gets to you, doesn't it? We started up the trail, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves set my heart racing. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. We had been hiking for about an hour when Riley suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. Listen, she hissed. I strained my ears, at first hearing nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Then faintly I caught it, a low rumbling sound, almost like a growl but different, deeper, more guttural. And there was something else in it, a sort of rhythmic quality that almost sounded like words. What the hell is that? Riley whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. Before I could answer, the sound cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying than the growl had been. I pressed on, moving slower now, every sense on high alert. The trail went deeper into the forests, the trees growing denser and the undergrowth thicker. Our flashlight beams seemed to grow weaker, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. Then, without warning, we stepped into a clearing. The sudden open space was jarring after the claustrophobic density of the forest. But it wasn't the clearing itself that made us both stop dead in our tracks. In the center of the clearing stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 10 feet in diameter. Its bark was scarred and twisted, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like faces frozen in screams of agony. And at its base, oh God, Riley choked out, her voice a mix of horror and disbelief. Scattered around the base of the tree were bones, hundreds of them gleaming white in the pale moonlight that managed to filter through the canopy. Some were clearly animal, deer, bear, maybe even mountain lion, but others unmistakably human. As we stood there frozen in shock, a sound came from behind us, a twig snapping, leaves rustling. We whirled around, rifles raised, only to find nothing, just the dark wall of the forest, impenetrable and menacing. We need to get out of here, Riley said, her voice shaking. Now I nodded, unable to form words. I'm trying to leave, but something caught my eye. There, at the edge of our flashlight beams, was a shape, dark, low to the ground, moving with fluid grace that defied natural law. "Riley," I whispered, my throat dry. "Don't move." But it was too late. The shape lunged forward faster than anything I'd ever seen. I caught a glimpse of gleaming eyes and razor-sharp teeth, and then it was on us. What followed was chaos of noise and movement. Gunshots rang out, deafening the previous silence. I felt something slam into me, sending me sprawling to the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, desperately searching for Riley. I caught sight of her backing away from... It was hard to focus on. Its shape seemed to shift and change, even as I watched. One moment it looked like a massive wolf, the next more like a bear, but always with those terrible, intelligent eyes. "Riley," I shouted, raising my rifle. But before I could fire, the creature was on her. There was a sickening crunch, a scream cut horrifyingly short, and then I stood there paralyzed with terror as the creature turned its attention to me. Those eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew true fear. This wasn't just an animal. It wasn't just a predator. There was an ancient, malevolent intelligence in those eyes, something that had no place in our world. It began to move towards me, its form shifting and changing with each step. I raised my rifle, squeezing off shot after shot, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. It was like shooting at a shadow. As it closed in, I did the only thing I could. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping in my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear it coming, an otherworldly growl growing louder. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. But still it pursued, always just behind me, toying with me like a cat with a mouse. And as I ran, the forest itself seemed to come alive around me. Trees shifted, blocking my path. Vines reached out to snag my ankles. It was as if the entire forest was working with the creature, trying to deliver me to its grasp. I don't know how long I ran or how far. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish chase. But eventually, miraculously, I burst out of the trail line and onto the road where we had parked our truck. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. There, at the edge of the forest, stood the creature. But now it had taken on a new form, one that sent ice through my veins. It was me, an exact copy down to the ranger uniform and the wild look of terror on its face. But those eyes, those terrible ancient eyes, remained the same. As I floored the accelerator, peeling away from that cursed place, the last thing I saw was my own face twisted into a grin of inhuman malice. I drove through the night, not stopping until I was miles away from the park. But even as the sun rose, bringing with it the illusion of safety, I knew the truth. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. And someday, somehow, it would come for me again. From now, all I can do is warn others. If you find yourself in the Great Smoky Mountains, and the forest falls silent around you, run, and don't look back. Because in those ancient woods, something waits. Something that knows your deepest fears, something that can wear your face. And once it sets its sights on you, there's no escape. The worst part of being a truck driver isn't the long hours, it's not even the highway miles that seem to stretch forever into the night. It's the silence. The hum of the engine becomes a lullaby of sorts, leaving you alone with your thoughts, with nothing but asphalt in your own mind to keep you company. Maybe that's why I took that job in the first place, to get away from everything else. But that silence can be dangerous. I'm Glenn, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for the past 15 years. I mostly keep to the back roads and lesser-known rates because I don't like the chaos of the interstate. I'm a quiet guy. I got no family waiting for me at home, just a couple of fishing rods and an old cabin that needs more work than I care to admit. I see my fair share of odd things out on the road, but none of it ever really rattled me. That was until a week ago. I was heading down a stretch of Route 50 in Nevada, the loneliest road in America, they call it. It's not a name they made up for tourists. It really is desolate. That night I had to run from Sacramento to Raleigh. It was late and the road was empty. My headlights sliced through the pitch black, illuminating the occasional tumbleweed and road signs warning about the next gas station being 100 miles away. I kept my radio off, and I was fine in the quiet until I saw something strange up ahead. It was a figure standing by the side of the road. Now, seeing people out there isn't exactly common, but it happens. Folks breaking down or hitchhiking, but this was different. The guy was just standing there, unmoving like he was waiting for something. I slowed down out of habit, squinting through the windshield. As I got closer, the figure started walking toward the road, making no effort to flag me down, just stepping into the lane slowly. I hit the brakes hard, bringing the truck to a screeching halt. The guy stood there staring at me, or at least I think he was. He was too far for me to make out any real details, but I could see his outline clearly in the beams of my headlights. He was tall, with a hunched posture, wearing what looked like an old torn coat. His clothes looked wrong somehow. A strange mismatch of modern and something almost antique, like he didn't belong. I rolled down my window and leaned out. "You okay?" I called out, keeping my hand on the door, ready to close it if he made any sudden moves. He didn't respond, just stood there, dead still. That's when I noticed the blood. It was dark, barely visible against his coat, but there was no mistaking it. Thick streaks ran down from his neck and pulled onto the road beneath him. My gut twisted and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't some random hitchhiker. This guy had been through something bad. I grabbed my phone and called. As the phone rang, the man started walking again, but not toward the truck. He just drifted across the road like he was in some kind of trance. Then, without warning, he veered sharply into the desert and vanished into the darkness. I propped the truck over to the shoulder and watched him go. The dispatcher finally picked up, and I told them what I saw, but they said there wasn't much they could do if the guy wasn't posing an immediate threat. I couldn't exactly blame them. It wasn't like I had a good description or any real information. Still, it bothered me. I thought about following him for a second, but decided against it. I wasn't some hero in a bad horror movie, so I shook it off and got back on the road. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for days to come. About an hour later, I spotted lights up ahead. It was a small gas station, one of the few out there on that stretch of Route 50. I needed a break, maybe a coffee to shake off the weirdness from earlier. I pulled in and parked near the pumps. The place was empty except for the clerk inside, a skinny guy with long hair who looked half asleep. I grabbed a cup of coffee and paid at the counter. While the guy was ringing me up, I casually mentioned seeing a strange man back on the road. The clerk's face went pale. "You're not the first person to say that," he muttered, looking down at the counter. "Happens every few years or so. Always some guy wandering in the middle of the road, bleeding just like you said." I frowned. "What do you mean every few years?" The clerk leaned in a little closer, glancing around like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Those stories, man, old stories about people disappearing out in the desert. They say if you see them, it's a bad omen. Something bad's about to happen." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and walked out. I wasn't the superstitious type, but the guy had rattled me. I got back in the truck and started the engine, feeling uneasy. The road ahead was darker than ever, and the thought of running into that guy again or someone like him made my skin crawl. As I pulled out of the gas station, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced in my side mirror, and for a split second I thought I saw a figure standing by the gas pumps. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just the empty lot and the flickering lights of the station fading into the distance. I kept driving through the night, trying to focus on the road. Hours passed. I checked my mirrors constantly, paranoid that I'd see something in the distance behind me. But it wasn't until dawn was creeping over the horizon that I saw something strange again. Up ahead, just barely visible in the morning light, there was another figure standing by the road. My heart pounded. It couldn't be the same guy, it just couldn't. But as I got closer, I realized this one was different. Shorter, stockier, wearing different clothes. But there was still something eerily similar. This one had blood on him, too. I slowed down but kept a good distance. I wasn't about to get out this time. The man didn't move. Didn't acknowledge the truck at all. He just stood there like the first guy, bleeding from his neck. I kept rolling, slower now, inching past him, eyes fixed on the figure. As soon as I passed, I sped up again, glancing in the rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved an inch. I didn't stop again until I hit Eli. I parked at the lot behind the diner, grabbed some breakfast, and tried to calm down. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that those men were just random crazies wandering the desert. After breakfast, I headed back to my truck, planning to get some rest before heading out again. But as soon as I opened the door, I noticed something on the ground next to my truck. A footprint, fresh, and it wasn't mine. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. Just me, the truck, and that footprint. I climbed into the cab, locking the doors behind me. That night, as I drove the final leg of my route, I kept thinking about those men. Where had they come from? Why were they bleeding? And why did it feel like there was something more to this? When I finally arrived at my destination, I did my delivery and decided to check into a motel for the night. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I slept for hours, but when I woke up, there was a knock at my door. Groggy, I opened it and found the motel clerk standing there looking nervous. "Someone left this for you," he said, handing me an envelope. "Found it by your truck this morning." I opened the envelope cautiously, and inside was a single piece of paper with 2 words written on it. "Is coming," that was it. Nothing else. I crumpled the paper in my hand, my heart racing again, but I forced myself to stay calm. This had to be a joke, someone messing with me. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I asked the clerk if he had seen who left the envelope, but he just shook his head. No one saw anything. It was just there when I came in for my shift. I thanked him and closed the door, leaning against it as I tried to gather my thoughts. Who was coming? Was it connected to the men I'd seen on the road? I paced the small motel room, debating what to do next. Part of me wanted to ignore it all, to chalk it up to coincidence and lack of sleep. But another part, growing louder by the minute, was screaming at me to get out of there. I packed my things, checked out of the motel, and headed back to the truck. And when I got in, I made a decision. I was going home. Call my dispatcher, tell them I was taking some personal time. I needed to clear my head to get away from whatever this was. As I started the engine, I noticed something in my side mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the parking lot. My breath caught in my throat. It was too far away to make out details, but I could see the dark stains on its clothes. Without thinking, I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. I drove for hours, pushing the speed limit, barely blinking as I watched the road ahead and constantly checked my mirrors. Every car I passed, every shadow on the roadside made my heart race. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting again. My cabin looked just like I'd left it, a bit run down but solid. As I walked up to the porch, I felt some of the tension leave my body. This was my place, my refuge. Whatever was going on out there couldn't touch me here. But as I reached for my keys, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, carved into the wooden doorframe, were 2 words, Gizzy. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the porch. My eyes darted around, searching the shadows between the trees surrounding my property. There was nothing, no movement, no sound, except for my own ragged breathing. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me and engaging every lock. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart. This couldn't be happening. How could anyone have known I was coming here? How could they have beaten me to my own home? I forced myself to move, to check every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The cabin was empty, exactly as I'd left it. But that didn't make me feel any safer. I grabbed my old shotgun from the closet, loaded it, and sat in my living room, eyes fixed on the door. As the hours ticked by, exhaustion began to set in. My eyes grew heavy, my grip on the shotgun loosening. I fought to stay awake, but eventually sleep went out. I woke with a start, unsure how long I'd been out. The cabin was dark, the only light coming from the moon outside. Something had woken me, a sound. I held my breath, listening intently. There was again a creaking floorboard coming from the kitchen. My heart pounded as I slowly stood up, raising the shotgun. I moved towards the kitchen, each step carefully placed to avoid making noise. As I reached the doorway, I saw a figure standing by the back door, tall and hunched, wearing a tattered coat. "Don't move," I shouted, aiming the shotgun. The figure turned slowly. In the dim light, I could make out his face, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should be. And there was so much blood running down his neck and staining his clothes. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" the man. If you could call him that, he didn't speak. He just stared at me with those empty eyes. Then slowly, he raised a hand and pointed at me. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the small kitchen. The figure stumbled backward, hitting the door. But he didn't fall. He didn't even seem hurt. He just kept staring, kept pointing. I fired again and again, until the gun was empty and my ears were ringing. But the figure remained standing, unmoved by the assault. Then, as I watched in horror, he began to fade. Like smoke dissipating in the wind, he grew less and less solid until he vanished completely. I stood there, shotgun still raised, for what felt like hours. My mind couldn't process what I'd just seen. It wasn't possible. None of this was possible. When I finally lowered the gun, I noticed something on the floor where the figure had been standing. A piece of paper. With trembling hands, I picked it up and read the message scrawled across it. "We are Legion. We are coming for you, Glenn." The next morning, I called the local sheriff's office. I didn't tell them everything. I knew how crazy it would sound. Instead, I reported a break-in, showed them the carving on my doorframe and the note I'd found in the kitchen. I laughed out the part about the ghostly figure that bullets couldn't hold. Deputy Wilkins, a stocky man with a thick mustache, took my statement with a skeptical look. "You're sure you didn't carve this yourself?" "Mr. Glenn? Maybe sleepwalking or something." I shook my head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I just got home last night and found it like this." He nodded, jotting something in his notepad. "And you say you've been seeing strange things on the road? Men covered in blood?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, out on Route 50, twice." The deputy exchanged a look with his partner, a younger guy named Rodriguez. "Well, I'll look into it. In the meantime, maybe consider setting up some security cameras. Could help if this happens again." After they left, I sat on my porch feeling more lost than ever. The police clearly didn't believe me, and I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. I spent the next few days holed up in my cabin, jumping at every sound, barely sleeping. I set up the security cameras like the deputy suggested, but they didn't make me feel any safer. Whatever was after me, I didn't think it would show up on camera. On the fourth day, my phone rang. It was Deputy Wilkins. "Mr. Glenn, we found something you might want to see. Can you come down to the station?" I arrived at the small sheriff's office an hour later, my stomach in knots. Deputy Wilkins led me to a small conference room where Deputy Rodriguez was waiting with a stack of files. "We did some digging," Wilkins said, gesturing for me to sit. "Turns out you're not the first person to report something like this." Rodriguez opened one of the files, showing me a newspaper clipping from the headline read, "Truck driver claims ghostly encounters on Route 50. This goes back decades, and Rodriguez explained, every few years someone comes in with a similar story, always truck drivers, always on that stretch of Route 50. I leaned forward, scanning the article. The details were eerily familiar. Driver seeing bloody figures on the road, feeling followed, receiving cryptic warnings. What happened to them? I asked, my mouth dry. The other drivers, Wilkins and Rodriguez, exchanged another look. "That's the thing," Wilkins said slowly. "Most of them disappeared, vanished without a trace." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Disappeared? All of them?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Not all. A few just went quiet. Never spoke about it again." Well, yeah, a good number of them were never seen again. I sat back, my mind reeling. This was bigger than I thought, older than I could have imagined. What? What is this? What's happening to me? Neither deputy had an answer for me. They showed me more files, more stories that mirrored my own. By the time I left the station, my head was spinning with questions and a deep, gnawing fear. As I walked to my truck, I noticed a man standing across the street watching me. He was ordinary looking, middle-aged, with graying hair, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made me shiver. When he saw me looking, he started walking towards me. I quickened my pace, reaching for my keys, but his voice stopped me in my tracks. "Glenn," he called out. "We need to talk about what you've seen, about what's coming." I turned slowly, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" He gave me a grim smile. "Someone who can help. Someone who's been where you are." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "We're not here. They're watching. Always watching. Meet me at the old quarry off Route 47 tonight at midnight. Come alone." I debated for hours whether to go to the quarry. Every instinct told me it was a trap, that I'd be walking right into danger, but the promise of answers from someone who might actually believe me was too tempting to resist. At 11:45 p.m., I pulled into the abandoned quarry. The place was eerie in the moonlight, all jagged rocks and deep shadows. I parked near the entrance, leaving the engine running, ready to bolt if necessary. At exactly midnight, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up beside me, and the man from earlier stepped out. Up close, I could see the deep lines etched into his face, the haunted look in his eyes. "Glad you came," he said, his voice gravelly. "Name's Hank. I've been where you are, Glenn, seen what you've seen." I got out of my truck, cautiously. "What do you know about all this? Who are they?" Hank sighed, leaning against his truck. "It's a long story, and you probably won't believe half of it. But here goes. Those things you've been seeing, they're not ghosts. Not exactly. They're more like echoes, imprints left behind by people who disappeared out there in the desert." I frowned.
"Disappeared how?"
"Taken," Hank said simply, "by something old, something that's been out there longer than any of us can imagine. It fades on fear, on isolation, and truckers were perfect prey, alone, tired, easy to pick off without anyone noticing for days or weeks." My mind reeled. It sounded insane, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it outright. So why me? Why now? Hank's expression darkened. Because you saw them. Once you see them, you're marked. Now you're aware of it now, and it won't stop until it has you. How do you know all this? I demanded. Because I'd been running from it for 30 years, Hank replied. I was a trucker too. Back in '93 I saw what you saw, got the same warnings, but I managed to escape. Been studying it ever since, trying to find a way to stop it. I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to process it all. So what do we do? How do we fight this thing? Hank pushed off his truck and walked towards me. That's the thing, Glenn. We can fight it, not directly. But I think I found a way. He never finished the sentence. In an instant, the quarry was flooded with blinding light. I shielded my eyes, hearing the roar of engines and the screech of tires. When my vision cleared, we were surrounded by black SUVs. Men in dark suits poured out, weapons drawn. Federal agents, one shouted, hands where we can see them. I raised my hands, my heart pounding. Beside me, Hank did the same. His face was a mask of fury and fear. He led them right to us. He hissed, "They've been watching you this whole time." Before I could respond, we were both grabbed and shoved into separate vehicles. As the SUV carrying me sped away, I caught a glimpse of Hank being loaded into another car. Then we turned a corner and he was gone. I lost track of time as we drove through the night. No one would tell me where we were going or what was happening. Eventually, we arrived at a nondescript building in the middle of nowhere. I was led inside through sterile white hallways and into a small windowless room. For what felt like hours, I sat alone in that room. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She sat across from me, placing a thick file on the table between us. "Mr. Glenn," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I'm Director Lawson. I apologize for the abrupt nature of your invitation here, but we've been monitoring your situation closely, and recent developments necessitated immediate action." I leaned forward. "You know about the things I've seen? The men on the road?" She nodded. "We know everything, Mr. Glenn. We've been tracking this phenomenon for decades. What you've encountered is far more dangerous than you realize." Hank said it was some kind of ancient entity. I said that it feeds on fear. Director Lawson's expression tightened. "Mr. Hank Wilson has been a person of interest in our investigation for some time. His theories are not entirely accurate. The truth is both simpler and far more complex." She opened the file, showing me photographs of strange symbols carved into rock faces, satellite images of odd formations in the desert, and charts filled with data I couldn't begin to understand. "What you've encountered," she explained, "is not a single entity, but a tear in the fabric of reality itself, a weak point between our world and something else, something that defies our understanding of physics and nature. The ghosts you've seen are manifestations of this anomaly, drawn to certain individuals for reasons we still don't fully comprehend." I sat back, my head spinning.
"So what does this have to do with me?
"Why am I here?" Director Lawson leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Because you, Mr. Glenn, along with a very small number of others, have a unique neurological makeup that allows you to perceive these manifestations more clearly than most. We believe you may be key to understanding and potentially closing this tier." "And Hank?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Being debriefed," she replied smoothly. His intentions were good, but his methods were becoming increasingly erratic. We couldn't risk him exposing our operation or endangering more people. I thought about everything I'd seen, everything I'd experienced. So what happens now? Director Lawson stood. "Now, Mr. Glenn, we'd like to offer you a choice. You can walk away from all of this, or ensure your safety, set you up with a new identity far from here. Or you can join us, help us understand what's happening, potentially save countless lives. I looked up at her, my decision already made. When do we start? The next few weeks were a blur of tests, interviews, and training. The nod that the facility was part of a top-secret government program dedicated to studying and containing supernatural phenomena. There were others like me, people who had encountered the anomaly and survived. I met researchers who had devoted their lives to understanding the tier, engineers developing technology to detect and measure its effects, and field agents trained to investigate sightings and protect potential targets. But the more I learned, the more questions I had. Why was the anomaly focused on that stretch of Route 50? Why did it manifest the way it did? And most importantly, how could we stop it? It was during one of our research sessions that everything changed. We were reviewing data from my encounters, trying to identify patterns, when one of the scientists, Dr. Chen, burst into the room. "We've cracked it," she said breathlessly, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. "We know what the entity is and why it's here." Director Lawson was on his feet immediately. "Explain." Dr. Chen pulled up a complex 3D model on the main screen. "It's not just a tier in reality, it's a doorway, and something on the other side is trying to come through." The room fell silent as we all stared at the swirling patterns on the screen. Dr. Chen continued, her voice shaking slightly. "We'll believe it's a being from another dimension, one that operates on laws of physics we can barely comprehend. It's been trying to enter our world for centuries, maybe millennia. The ghosts, the disappearances, they're all side effects of its attempts to breach the barrier." "So why truckers?" I asked. "Why that specific road?" Dr. Chen turned to me. "Because of the isolation, the minimal nature of long-haul driving, it creates a state of mind that's more permeable to influence from the other side. That stretch of road, it's a focal point, a place where the barrier between worlds is naturally thinner." Dr. Lawson's face was grim, and now what's changed? Dr. Chen took a deep breath. "Our calculations show that the barrier is weakening fast. If we don't find a way to reinforce it soon, that thing will break through." And if it does, she didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the implication. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Weeks," Dr. Chen replied. "Maybe less." Director Lawson straightened up, her voice full of determination. "Then we have work to do. Dr. Chen, I want every available resource focused on finding a way to strengthen that barrier. Then, you and the other sensitives will need to prepare. If we can stop this thing from coming through, you may be our last line of defense." As everyone rushed to their tasks, I stood there staring at the swirling patterns on the screen. Somewhere out there, beyond the veil of our reality, something ancient and unknowable was waiting. And whether I liked it or not, I was now at the center of humanity's fight for survival. The lonely roads I traveled for years had led me here to this moment. And I know that whatever came next would make those ghostly encounters seem like a pleasant dream compared to the nightmare that was coming. As I left the room to begin my preparation, I couldn't help but think of all the truckers still out there, driving those dark, empty roads, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the reach of their headlights. I silently vowed to do whatever it took to protect them, to protect everyone from the horrors that were trying to break into our world. The real journey, I realized, was just beginning, and the road ahead was darker and more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The crackle of the radio cut through the quiet of the ranger station like a knife. I looked up from my paperwork, my hand already reaching for the receiver. It was Tuesday, June 15, 2004, a day that would change everything. "Tolcott here," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden quickening in my pulse. There was always a moment of anticipation before a call, a mix of dread and excitement that never quite went away no matter how long I'd been doing this job. The voice on the other end belonged to dispatch. "We've got a situation," he said. Family of 4 missing near Horse Mountain Ridge. Last contact was 3 days ago. I felt my stomach tighten. 3 days was a long time in the wilderness, especially for a family that might not be prepared for extended survival. Any details on their planned route or supplies? I asked. Not much, the dispatcher replied. They were supposed to be on a 4-day camping trip. Cars still at the trailhead parking lot, no sign of them returning. I nodded, even though no one could see me.
Alright, I'm on it, I said.
You'll gather a team and head out within the hour. As I put down the radio, I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. My name is Dean Talcourt, and I'm not what most people picture when they think of a forest ranger. I didn't grow up in the woods, didn't learn to hunt or track as a kid. I was born and raised in Oakland, California, city kid through and through. But I always felt a pull towards the wilderness and need to escape the concrete and noise. It started with weekend hikes, then longer camping trips. Before I knew it, I was spending more time in the forest than in the city. When I heard about a job opening with the Forest Service, it felt like fate. Now at 32, I've been working as a ranger in Shasta Trinity National Forest for the better part of a decade. I grabbed my pack, always ready to go, and headed out to round up a team. Tom and Eric were already gearing up when I reached them. They'd heard the call too. Tom was a veteran, pushing 50, but still as fit as guys half his age. Eric was younger, early 20s, full of energy and always eager to prove himself. I'd worked together often enough to have a good rhythm. "What's the situation?" Tom asked, his voice gruff but concerned. I fooled them in as we finished prepping our gear. A family of 4 has been missing for 3 days near Horse Mountain Ridge. Oh, we need to move fast. Eric nodded, his usual grin replaced by a look of determination. Are they just lost, or is something worse going on? I shrugged, not wanting to speculate. I'll know when we find them. Let's focus on getting there first. As we headed out, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Maybe it was the unusually quiet forest, or the way the shadows seemed to deepen as we moved deeper into the trees. Shasta Trinity was always beautiful, but today it felt different, oppressive almost. The hike to Horse Mountain Ridge was steep but familiar. I moved quickly, our boots crunching on the dry pine needles that carpeted the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of evergreens and sun-baked earth. About an hour into our trek, Tom broke the silence. You know, the only thing worse than a missing family is missing lunch. Eric groaned at the weak attempt at humor, but I appreciated it. Anything to break the tension that seemed to be building with each step we took deeper into the forests. As we climbed higher, the trees began to thin out, giving way to rocky outcroppings. The view would have been breathtaking on any other day. Miles of green forest stretching out below us, and in the distance the peaks of the Trinity Alps rising up. But today, all I could focus on was scanning the landscape for any sign of our missing family. Let's split up, I suggested as we reached a clearing. We can cover more ground that way, keep in radio contact, and check in every 30 minutes. Tom and Eric nodded, and we each chose a direction. I headed towards a particularly promising outcrop, hoping for a better vantage point. As I climbed, the silence of the forest seemed to deepen. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to. This was different, oppressive. Even the wind seemed muted. As if the very trees were holding their breath, I reached the top of the outcropping and paused to catch my breath. The view was expansive, but there was no sign of smoke from a campfire, no bright flash of a tent among the trees. Just endless green stretching out in all directions. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A rustling in the underbrush, too heavy to be a small animal, too erratic to be the wind. I turned slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the knife at my belt. For a moment I saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. Large, dark, and decidedly not human. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Dingy there?" Any sign of them? It was Tom's voice, steady and professional. I hesitated, my eyes still fixed on the spot where I'd seen whatever it was. Nothing yet, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. But I think we might not be alone up here. There was a pause before Tom responded. What do you mean? I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe what I'd seen or thought I'd seen without sounding crazy? Finally, I said, just keep your eyes open. Something doesn't feel right. As I clicked off the radio, I couldn't shake the feeling that our search had just become something much more dangerous than a simple rescue mission. The forest around me suddenly felt alien and hostile, and for the first time in years, I found myself longing for the safety of the city I had left behind. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. As the afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees, once familiar and comforting, now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me since my strange sighting, focusing instead on the task at hand. We regrouped after an hour of searching, sharing what little we had found, which was nothing. No footprints, no discarded gear, not even a stray piece of trash. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. This doesn't make sense, Eric said, frustration evident in his voice. A Thermite 4 doesn't just disappear without a trace. Tom nodded, his weathered face creased with concern. We're missing something. Let's expand our search area. As we pushed further into the wilderness, the terrain became more challenging. We scrambled over moss-covered rocks and pushed through dense underbrush. The physical exertion helped to clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was nearing dusk when Eric shouted, "Over here." I found something. Tom and I rushed to his position. Eric was kneeling beside a small clearing, holding up a child's backpack. It was bright pink, covered in cartoon unicorns, the kind of thing an 8 or 9-year-old girl might carry. Good eye, I said, examining the bag. It was muddy, but otherwise intact. Any sign of the others? Eric shook his head. Nothing. It's like this just fell out of the sky. We searched the area thoroughly, but found no other traces of the family. As the light began to fade, we were forced to make a decision. We can't keep searching in the dark, Tom said, always the voice of reason. We should set up camp and start fresh in the morning. I nodded, though the idea of spending the night in these woods made my skin crawl. We found a suitable clearing and quickly set up our tents. As we sat around a small campfire eating our rations, an uncomfortable silence settled over us. So, Eric said finally, his usual cheerfulness subdued. What do you think happened to them? Tom shrugged. Could be anything. Maybe they got turned around, wandered off the trail. For 3 days, Eric counted. And why leave the backpack behind? I remained silent, my mind returning to what I had seen or thought I had seen earlier that day. The memory of that dark, hulking shape moving through the trees sent a shiver down my spine. Seeing Tom's voice pulled me from my thoughts. You've been quiet. What's your take? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. I'm not sure, but I think there might be something out there, something dangerous. Eric leaned forward, his eyes wide. What do you mean, like a bear? I shook my head. No, not a bear. Something different. I can't explain it, but I've got a bad feeling about this whole situation. Tom frowned. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll get a fresh start in the morning, and hopefully things will become clearer. As we retired to our tents, I couldn't shake the feeling that our search was about to take a dark turn. Sleep eluded me, my mind filled with images of shadowy creatures lurking just beyond the firelight. Little did I know the true horrors of Shasta Trinity were yet to reveal themselves. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, a fine mist hanging in the air. We boot camped quickly, eager to resume our search. The atmosphere was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what the day might bring. We decided to head higher up the ridge, hoping to get a better vantage point. The climb was steep, the ground slick with moisture. As we ascended, the mist thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. It was just past noon when I saw it, a flash of orange through the fog. My heart raced as I approached, hoping against hope that we found a survivor. But as the shape came into focus, my hope turned to dread. It was a body, a small body, face down in a shallow depression. The bright orange jacket was what had caught my eye, now half covered in dirt and debris. "Over here," I called out, my voice sounding strange and muffled in the thick air. As Tom and Eric rushed over, I knelt beside the figure. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. With a heavy heart, I gently turned her over. Her eyes were wide open, staring sightlessly at the misty sky. The skin around her mouth was torn and raw, as if she'd been biting her lips hard enough to draw blood. There were no obvious signs of injury, no indication of what had killed her. "Jesus," Eric whispered, turning away. Tom knelt beside me, his face grim. No signs of animal attack, no exposure symptoms. What the hell happened to her? I shook my head at a loss for words. As I stood up, something caught my eye, movement in the trees beyond our small clearing. I squinted, trying to pierce the fog. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, like a nightmare taking shape, I saw it again, a creature, taller than any man, with matted dark fur covering its massive frame. It moved with an unnatural gait, its motions jerky and awkward, yet undeniably powerful. "Tom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "don't move. Look to your left, about 50 yards out." Tom turned slowly, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. I saw his eyes widen as he caught sight of the creature. "What the hell is that?" He breathed. Before I could respond, the thing turned its head. For a brief, terrifying moment, I saw its face, if you could call it that. It was a horrific mashup of animal features with a blunt snout and patches of raw, hairless skin. Its eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to lock onto us. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanishing into the mist-shrouded forest without a sound. Eric, who had been radioing in our discovery, looked up. "What's going on? You two look like you've seen a ghost." Tom and I exchanged glances. How could we explain what we'd just witnessed? "We need to get out of here," I said finally. "Something's very wrong in these woods." As if in response to my words, an inhuman howl echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering from the trees in panic. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a sound that marked the beginning of our descent into true horror. The discovery of the girl's body and the sighting of the creature had shaken us all. Even Tom, usually unflappable, seemed on edge as we continued our search. We moved with heightened caution, every snapping twig and rustling leaf setting our nerves on edge. It was Eric who found the second body. His shout cut through the eerie silence of the forest, drawing Tom and me to his location. What we found there defied explanation and shattered any remaining hope of a simple rescue mission. The body was that of a man, presumably the girl's father, but the state of the corpse was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my years as a ranger. The chest cavity had been torn open, ribs shattered and splayed outward like a blooming flower of bone and tissue. The face was frozen in a rictus of terror, eyes wide and mouth agape in a silent scream. Eric stumbled away from the grisly scene, retching into the underbrush. Even Tom, with all his experience, looked shaken. "This isn't the work of any animal I know," he muttered, kneeling to examine the body more closely. I nodded, my mind racing. "We need to call this in, whatever's happening here. It's way beyond our capabilities." As Tom readied for backup, I scanned our surroundings, half expecting to see the creature watching us from the shadows. The forest seemed to press in around us, the very air thick with menace. "They're sending in state troopers," Tom reported, his voice grim. "Maybe even the feds, but it'll take time for them to mobilize and get out here." I checked my watch. It was already late afternoon, the overcast sky darkening with the approach of evening. "We can't stay here. We need to find a defensible position to wait for backup." We gathered our gear and moved out, the weight of our discovery hanging heavy over us. As we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hooded, guided by some unseen force deeper into the heart of the forest. Night fell quickly, the darkness absolute under the thick canopy of trees. We found a small clearing and set up camp, our movements automatic and subdued. No one suggested splitting up to take watch. We all knew the safety of numbers was our only defense against whatever stalked these woods. As we huddled around our meager campfire, the sounds of the forest seemed to intensify. Branches creaked and groaned in the wind, and strange guttural noises echoed in the distance. "What do you think is out there?" Eric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not natural." Tom, ever the pragmatist, tried to bring some reason to the situation. "Let's not jump to conclusions. There could be a rational explanation for all of this." But even as he spoke, I could see the doubt in his eyes. We had all seen too much, experienced too many inexplicable things to cling to rationality. As the night wore on, sleep became an impossibility. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. And through it all, I could shake the image of that creature, its unnatural movements, its terrifying visage. It was just past midnight. We heard it, the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush, drawing ever closer to our camp. We extinguished the fire and readied our weapons, hearts pounding in the darkness. The creature emerged from the trees, its massive form silhouetted against the night sky. But it wasn't alone. A second shape followed, equally large and menacing. In that moment, as the creatures advanced on our position, I realized that our nightmare was only beginning. The true horrors of Shasta Trinity were about to be unleashed, and I feared we were woefully unprepared for what was to come. We will narrowed to a pinpoint of terror as the creatures advanced on our camp. Our movements were deliberate, almost methodical, like predators that knew their prey was cornered. In the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, I could make out more details of their horrifying forms. They were massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad hunched shoulders and long, powerful arms that nearly reached the ground. Their bodies were covered in matted fur, dark and reeking of decay. But it was their faces that truly chilled me to the core, a nightmarish blend of human and animal features with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. "Run!" I shouted, my voice breaking the paralysis that had gripped us. We scattered, abandoning our camp and plunging into the dark forest. I could hear Tom and Eric crashing through the underbrush nearby, and behind us the thunderous footfalls of our pursuers. My lungs burned as I ran, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs. The forest that had once been my sanctuary now seemed alive with malevolence, branches clawing at my clothes and roots threatening to trip me with every step. A scream pierced the night, Eric's voice filled with terror and pain. I skidded to a stop, torn between the instinct to flee and the need to help my friend. "Eric," I called out, my voice hoarse. There was no response, only the sound of something large moving through the trees, coming closer. I fumbled for the flare gun on my belt, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Suddenly, one of the creatures burst into view. In the red glow of the flare, I saw Eric dangling from its massive hand, his body limp and unmoving. Without thinking, I fired. The flare struck the creature in the chest, igniting its matted fur. It let out a roar that shook the very ground, a sound of rage and pain that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. It dropped Eric and lurched towards me, its burning form like something out of a nightmare. I ran like I'd never run before, my legs pumping mechanically, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and that monstrosity as possible. Time lost all meaning as I fled through the dark forest. Minutes or hours could have passed. I couldn't tell. All I knew was the burning in my lungs, the ache in my muscles, and the all-consuming fear that drove me onward. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally collapsed, my body giving out. I found myself at the base of a massive oak, its gnawed roots providing a small measure of shelter. As I gasped for breath, the events of the night replayed in my mind like a horror film. Eric was gone, Tom was missing, and I was alone in a forest that had revealed itself to be far more dangerous and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. As consciousness slipped away, my last thoughts were of the ranger station, of the normal world that now seemed so far away. Would I ever make it back? Or would I become just another victim of whatever ungodly things now stalked the woods of Shasta Trinity? The darkness took me and I welcomed its embrace, a temporary respite from the nightmare that my world had become. I awoke to the sound of helicopter rotors, the noise cutting through the forest canopy. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Surely rescue couldn't have come so soon. But as I stumbled to my feet, wincing at the ache in every muscle, I realized it was real. The events of the past night came flooding back, and with them a renewed sense of urgency. I had to get out of these woods. Had to warn someone about what was happening here. I stumbled through the forest, following the sound of the helicopter. As I emerged into a small clearing, I saw it. A search and rescue chopper hovering above the treetops. I waved my arms frantically, shouting until my voice gave out. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was airlifted out of the forest, subjected to a barrage of questions from concerned paramedics and stern-faced officials. I told them everything about the missing family, the bodies we'd found, the creatures we'd encountered. With each retelling, I could see the doubt growing in their eyes. By the time we reached the ranger station, a crowd had gathered. News travels fast in small communities, and the story of missing rangers and a failed rescue mission had drawn curious onlookers and worried family members alike. I was ushered into the station, where I found myself face to face with my supervisor, Chief Ranger Michaels. His expression was a mix of relief and concern. "Dean," he said, his voice grave, "what the hell happened out there?" I took a deep breath and recounted the events once more. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief growing in Michael's eyes. When I finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. "Dean," Michael said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you've been through a traumatic experience, but what you're describing, it's impossible." I knew what I saw, I insisted, frustration building. Tom saw it too. And Eric, my voice caught as I remembered Eric's fate. Michael sighed. "We've got search teams combing the area. They'll find Tom and Eric. As for these creatures you described, well, I'm sure there's a rational explanation. I wanted to argue to make them understand the danger that lurked in those woods, but I could see it was useless. They hadn't been there, hadn't seen what I'd seen. To them, I was just a ranger who cracked under pressure, conjuring monsters to explain a tragedy. The next few days were a whirlwind of debriefings, medical examinations, and psych evaluations. They found Tom's body on the second day of the search. The official report listed the cause of death as an animal attack, probably a bear. Eric was never found. As for me, I was placed on indefinite leave. The official story was that I was recovering from the physical and emotional trauma of a rescue mission gone wrong. But I knew the truth. They thought I was crazy, a liability. Nights were the worst. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those creatures, heard Eric scream, felt the terror of being hunted through the dark forest. I barely slept, existing in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. Weeks passed, and slowly life in a small town near Shasta Trinity began to return to normal. The story of the ill-fated rescue mission faded from local gossip, replaced by more mundane concerns. But for me, there was no going back to normal. I knew what was out there, knew the danger that lurked. Months passed, but the memories of that night in Shasta Trinity refused to fade. I tried to move on and rebuild some semblance of a normal life, but the nightmares persisted. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow at dusk sent my heart racing. The forest that had once been my sanctuary had become a source of unrelenting terror. It was a crisp autumn morning when Chief Ranger Michaels called me into his office. I hadn't set foot in the ranger station since that fateful day, and walking through those familiar halls felt like stepping into another life. Michaels looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. "Dean," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, not sure how to answer. How could I explain the constant fear, the sleepless nights, the feeling that I was going crazy? "We'll need you back, Dean," Michael said, his voice gentle but firm. There's been another disappearance in the area where we lost Tom and Eric. A solo hiker reported missing 3 days ago. My blood ran cold. You can't seriously be thinking of sending another team up there. Michael sighed. "We don't have a choice, but this time we're going in prepared. Full team, armed escorts, the works. And we need you, Dean. You know that area better than anyone." I wanted to refuse to run as far from Shasta Trinity as I could, but a part of me knew I'd never find peace until I faced what was out there. Maybe this time with a full team we could uncover the truth. "When do we leave?" I heard myself ask. The next morning found me gearing up alongside a team of seasoned rangers and 2 state troopers. The mood was tense. Everyone had heard rumors about what had happened to Tom and Eric, even if they didn't believe the wilder parts of my story. As we set out, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The forest looked the same as it always had, towering pines, crisp mountain air, the distant cry of an eagle. But now I knew what secrets it held, what horrors lurked in its depths. We made good time. Reaching the area where we'd found the first body by mid-afternoon, I tried to push away the memories, to focus on the task at hand, but every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. It was nearing dusk when we found the first clue, a torn backpack, its contents scattered across a small clearing. As the team spread out to search the area, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We were being watched. I turned slowly, my hand moving to the rifle slung across my back. At first, I saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. "Contact," I shouted, bringing my rifle up. The forest erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out, mixed with shouts of confusion and terror. I caught glimpses of massive, dark shapes moving through the trees with impossible speed. In the fading light, I saw one of the state troopers go down, dragged into the underbrush by a hulking figure. His screams were cut short by a sickening crunch. "Fall back," I yelled, desperately trying to rally the team. But it was too late. We were surrounded, outmatched by creatures that defied explanation. As night fell, the true horror of our situation became clear. We were no longer the hunters, we were the prey. The darkness of the forest was absolute, broken only by the occasional muzzle flash as we fought desperately against our unseen assailants. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and a more primal musky odor that I recognized from my previous encounter. Our team had been scattered, picked off one by the creatures that stalked us through the night. I could hear distant screams abruptly cut off and the sickening sound of bones being crushed. I found myself alone, my back against a massive oak tree, rifle clutched tightly to my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps, every sense strained for any sign of approaching danger. A twig snapped to my left, a whirled finger tightening on the trigger. In the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy, I saw it, one of the creatures standing mere feet away. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its massive frame was covered in matted fur, caked with what looked like dried blood. Its face was a nightmare, features that seemed almost human, twisted into something monstrous. And its eyes, God, its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence filled with malice and hunger. For a moment we stood frozen, hunter and prey locked in a deadly stalemate. Then, with a roar that shook the very ground, it charged. I fired. The muzzle flash briefly illuminated the scene, giving me stark relief. The creature staggered but didn't fall. I fired again and again, emptying my clip into its massive chest. It crashed to the ground mere inches from me, its claws raking across my leg as it fell. The pain was immediate and intense, but I had no time to dwell on it. More shapes were emerging from the darkness, drawn by the sound of gunfire. I scrambled to reload, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely manage it. As I slammed the fresh clip home, I heard a sound that froze my blood, the distinctive whomp 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 of helicopter rotors. The spotlight cut through the canopy, illuminating the clearing. In its harsh glare, I saw the full extent of the horror that surrounded me. At least a dozen creatures were converging on my position, their eyes reflecting the light like hellish beacons. The helicopter swooped lower, and I heard the rattling roar of a mounted machine gun. The creatures scattered, melting back into the shadows with uneven speed. As the helicopter touched down, I limped towards it, every step in agony. Strong hands pulled me aboard, and we lifted off, leaving the nightmarish forest behind. In the days that followed, as I recovered in a military hospital, I learned the full story. The government had known about the creatures for years, keeping their existence secret while they studied them from afar. Our disastrous mission had forced their hand, leading to a full-scale military operation to contain the threat. Shasta Trinity National Forest was quietly closed to the public officially due to environmental concerns. I know the truth, but who would believe me? In time, the nightmares faded, replaced by a dull ache of memory and a permanent limp, souvenirs of my final confrontation with the unknown. Sometimes on quiet nights, I find myself staring out at the distant forests, wondering what other secrets they might hold. And I pray that the barriers we put in place are enough to keep the horrors of Shasta Trinity contained, because if they're not, God help us all. I didn't think anything of it when I saw the rusted old sign pointing to Millwood. It was just another detour off Highway 49, a shortcut I decided to take because I was sick of the interstate. My name's Elliot Branson, and I'm the guy who likes to take the road less traveled both literally and figuratively. Life's always been a bit of an uphill battle for me, but I've got a sense of humor and an iron will that's kept me going through some tough times. The sun was dipping low on the horizon as I turned off onto the narrow road leading to Millwood. The forest pressed in close on both sides, creating a tunnel of greenery that seemed to swallow my car whole. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool, crisp air fill the vehicle. The scent of pine and damp earth tickled my nostrils, a welcome change from the stale air conditioning I'd been breathing for hours. As I drove deeper into the woods, a nagging feeling began to gnaw at the back of my mind. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to snatch at my car. I shook my head, chuckling at my overactive imagination. It was just a shortcut through some backwoods town, nothing more. I glanced at my phone, thinking I should let my sister know I'd be running late. No signal. Great. I tossed the useless device onto the passenger seat and focused on the road ahead. The pavement was rough, full of potholes and patches, forcing me to slow down to avoid damaging my tires. As the miles ticked by, I began to wonder if I had made a mistake. There were no signs of civilization, no houses, no side roads, nothing but an endless sea of trees. Just as I was considering turning back, I came upon a fork in the road. The left path looked more traveled, a ribbon of cracked asphalt disappearing into the distance. The right was overgrown, barely more than a dirt track. I hesitated, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. The smart choice would be to take the left fork and follow the path more traveled. But something about the right fork called to me. It was the road less taken. And isn't that what I always prided myself on? With a deep breath, I turned right. The road immediately became rougher, my car bouncing and jostling as I navigated around potholes and overexposed routes. I was just about to admit defeat and turn around when I saw it. An old, decrepit house sitting back from the road, almost hidden by the forest. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up into what used to be a driveway, gravel crunching under my tires. As I stepped out of the car, the silence hit me like a physical force. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I approached the house slowly, taking in its dilapidated state. The paint was peeling off in large chunks, revealing rotting wood underneath. Windows were broken or missing entirely, giving the facade a hollow, haunted look. The front door hung crookedly on its hinges, swaying slightly in a breeze that I couldn't feel. Every instinct told me to get back in my car and leave, but I'd come this far, and something about this place drew me in. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the creaking porch and pushed open the door. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I entered the house, sending up small clouds of dust with each step. The air inside was thick and musty, heavy with the scent of decay and abandonment. Weak rays of fading sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the room. I found myself in what must have once been a living room. Tattered furniture, covered in a thick layer of dust, was scattered around haphazardly. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with what looked like family photographs, their subjects long faded into obscurity. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something odd about the room. Despite the obvious signs of neglect, there were no cobwebs. In a house this old and abandoned, I would have expected to see spiders everywhere. But the corners were bare, the ceiling clean of any silken strands. The staircase to my right led up to the second floor, but it looked unstable, several steps missing or rotted through. I decided to stay on the ground level, not wanting to risk a fall in this isolated place. As I moved deeper into the house, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like someone or something was watching me. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere. That's when I heard it. A faint rhythmic thumping sound coming from the back of the house. It was so out of place in the deathly silence that I froze, straining my ears to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Thump, thump, thump. It was real, and it was coming from beyond a closed door at the end of a long hallway. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to get out of the house and drive away as fast as I could. But curiosity, that damnable trait that had led me down this road in the first place, propelled me forward. I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The thumping grew louder with each step, a steady, ominous beat that seemed to sync with my pulse. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, cool metal sending a shock through my system. I turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. The thumping was definitely coming from below. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight function. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating rough stone walls and wooden steps that vanished into shadows. Taking a deep breath, I began my descent. The air grew colder with each step, and a new smell assaulted my nostrils, a sickeningly sweet odor that made me gag. It was the smell of rot, of things long dead and decaying. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, my light fell upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. Bones. Piles and piles of bones, some still with bits of flesh attached, all gnawed and broken. They covered the floor of the cellar, a macabre carpet that crunched beneath my feet. I stumbled back, my mind reeling from the horror before me. That's when I felt it, a sharp pain in my neck, like the sting of an insect. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. As consciousness slipped away, I caught a glimpse of a figure emerging from shadows, a twisted grin revealing teeth filed to points. Then everything went black. I awoke to darkness and pain, my head throbbed, and every muscle in my body ached as if I'd been beaten. As consciousness slowly returned, panic set in. I was bound, my wrists and ankles secured with rough rope that chafed against my skin. The air was damp and cool, carrying the same sickly sweet odor I'd smelled in the cellar. I forced myself to take deep breaths, fighting back the urge to scream. Panicking wouldn't help me now. I needed to assess my situation to find a way out. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I began to make out my surroundings. I was in a small, windowless room with stone walls. A single wooden door was the only break in the monotony of gray rock. A faint glow seeped in from under the door, providing just enough light to see the outline of my prison. I tested my bonds, twisting my wrists and ankles, searching for any give in the rope. They were tied tight, cutting into my flesh when I struggled too hard. How long had I been unconscious? Hours or days? There was no way to tell time in this lightless pit. My throat was parched, my stomach empty and aching. Whatever or whoever had brought me here clearly wasn't concerned with my comfort or survival. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard footsteps approaching from beyond the door. My heart rate spiked, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a creak that set my teeth on edge. A figure stepped into the room, backlit by flickering torchlight from the hallway beyond. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out more details. It was a man, tall and lanky, with wild, unkempt hair that stuck out in all directions. But it was his eyes that caught and held my attention, wide and filled with a manic energy that sent shivers down my spine. He grinned at me, revealing teeth that had been filed to sharp points. "Well, look who's awake," he said, his voice raspy and unsettling. "You shouldn't have come here, stranger." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. "What do you want?" I managed to croak out. The man's grin widened, stretching his face in a way that seemed almost inhuman. "It's not about what I want," he replied, a chuckle bubbling up from his throat. "It's about what you're gonna give us." Before I could respond, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The lock clicked into place, leaving me alone once more in the suffocating darkness. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, bound and helpless. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind conjuring terrifying scenarios of what might await me. The man's words echoed in my head. "What you gonna give us? What did he mean? And who are us?" I'm not sure how long I was left alone. It could have been hours or days. My body ached from being in the same position for so long, and thirst clawed at my throat. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door opened again. This time there were two of them, the tall man from before and a woman who looked equally feral. Her hair was a tangled mess and her eyes held the same crazed look as her companion. They approached me without a word, grabbing my arms and hauling me to my feet. I tried to resist, but my muscles were weak from dehydration and inactivity. They dragged me out of the room and into a torchlit corridor. As we moved, I caught glimpses of other rooms, some with barred windows in the doors, others standing open to reveal horrors I couldn't fully comprehend in the brief moments I saw them. We emerged into a larger chamber, and I had to bite back a scream. The walls were lined with cages, each containing bones and what looked like the remains of other victims. The smell that had been merely unpleasant before now became overwhelming, a miasma of death and decay that made me gag. "We're gonna have some fun with you," the woman said, her voice dripping with malice. They dragged me to a table in the center of the room and strapped me down, ignoring my struggles and pleas. As they loomed over me, instruments glinting in the torchlight, I realized with horrifying clarity that my ordeal was only beginning. The next few hours, or was it days, blurred into a nightmarish haze of pain and terror. My captors, who I came to think of as the feral man and woman, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in inflicting suffering. They cut into me with rusted blades, talking all the while about rituals and sacrifices, their voices blending into a hellish symphony that haunted my feverish dreams. I passed out more than once, the pain too much to bear. Each time I regained consciousness, I found myself in a different state of torment. Sometimes I was strapped to the table, other times suspended from the ceiling by cruel hooks. Through it all, the feral couple continued their demented work, harvesting blood and bits of flesh for purposes I couldn't begin to fathom. During one of my more lucid moments, I managed to focus on their ramblings. They spoke of an ancient power sleeping beneath the forest, a hunger that needed to be fed. They saw themselves as its servants, providing sacrifices to keep it sated and win its favor. "The sleeper stirs," the feral man said, his eyes gleaming with fanatic fervor. "It hungers for fresh blood, for the essence of the unwary traveler." The feral woman nodded, running a blade along my arm and catching the blood in a crude clay bowl. "And we shall feed it, my love. We shall feast upon its leavings and grow strong." I wanted to scream, tell them they were insane, that there was no ancient power, no sleeping horror beneath the earth. But my throat was raw from previous screams, and I could manage little more than a weak whimper as my blood dripped into their bowl. I felt my grip on reality slipping. The torchlight seemed to waver and dance, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. And in those shadows I began to see things, shapes that shouldn't exist, eyes that glowed with an otherworldly hunger. Was I hallucinating from the pain and blood loss? Was there some truth to the mad ramblings of my captors? I didn't know. And part of me didn't want to know. Just when I thought I could take no more, when the line between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition, they untied me from the table. I was too weak to resist as they dragged me back to the small room where I'd first awoken. They tossed me inside like a discarded rag doll, my body a mass of cuts, bruises, and burning pain. The feral man stood in the doorway, grinning down at me with those razor-sharp teeth. "Rest now, little morsel," he said, his voice almost gentle. "We have big plans for you tomorrow. A sleeper will feast, and we shall ascend." The door slammed shut, plunging me once more into darkness. I lay there on the cold stone floor, my mind reeling from what I'd experienced. Part of me hoped that this was all some vivid, horrible nightmare that I'd wake up in my car having dozed off at the wheel. But the pain was too real, the memories too vivid. This was happening, and unless I found a way out, I was gonna die in this hellish place. As unconsciousness began to claim me once more, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would find a way to escape, to expose the horrors lurking in the forests of Millwood. If my body was some ancient sleeping evil beneath the earth, I would find a way to stop it. With that last defiant thought, I slipped into a fitful, pain-filled sleep. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I came to, something had changed. The oppressive silence that had filled my prison was broken by a new sound, soft footsteps approaching my door. I tensed, expecting the worst, my mind conjuring images of new torments to come. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Instead of the towering figures of my captors, a small silhouette appeared in the doorway. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it was a young girl, no more than 12 years old, with wide, terrified eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Shh," she whispered, putting a finger to her lips. "I'm going to help you." I wanted to speak, to ask who she was and how she'd gotten here, but my parched throat wouldn't cooperate. The girl knelt beside me. Her small hands were surprisingly strong as she helped me to my feet. I leaned heavily on her, my body screaming in protest at the movement. "We have to hurry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll be back soon." She led me out of the room and into the torchlit corridor beyond. The house, if you could call this labyrinth of horror a house, was even bigger than I had realized. We navigated a maze of hallways and chambers, some filled with implements of torture that made my stomach churn. Others, eerily empty, were saved for dark stains on the floors and walls. As we moved, I found my voice. "How did you get here?" I asked, my words coming out as a hoarse whisper. The girl's face clouded with pain. "They took my family," she said, her voice trembling. "I'd been hiding, waiting for a chance to escape. When I saw them bring you in, I knew I had to help. My heart ached for this brave, terrified child." "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Rennie," she said. "My name is Ren." We continued our slow, painful progress through the house. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every creak of the floorboards a herald of discovery. But Ren moved with purpose, guiding us through the maze with a familiarity that spoke of long, terrifying experience. Finally, we reached a door that led outside. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and I took a deep breath, savoring it after the fetid atmosphere of the house. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, but after the oppressive blackness inside, it felt almost bright. Reed led me to a hidden path through the woods, away from the house. We walked for what felt like hours, my strength slowly returning as we put distance between us and that place of horrors. The girl told me more about the family of cannibals, how they had been living in these woods for generations, preying on anyone who strayed too close. "They believe in some kind of ancient evil," Ren explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "They think their sacrifices keep it sleeping, but that it gives them power in return." I shuddered, remembering the ramblings of my captors. "Do you think it's real?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. He was silent for a long moment. "I'm seeing things," she finally said. "Things that shouldn't exist, but I don't know if it's some ancient evil or just the evil that lives in people's hearts." We continued on in silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small cabin, abandoned but relatively intact. We took shelter there, using what little supplies we could find to tend to my wounds and rest. Over the next few days, I regained my strength while Ren kept watch. She was incredibly resourceful, finding edible plants in the forest and setting simple traps for small game. I learned that she had been captive for months, watching in horror as her family was slowly killed and consumed. Her survival instinct and quick wit had kept her alive, hiding in the shadows and learning the layout of the house. As my body healed, we began to plan our escape from the forest, but we both knew that simply running wasn't enough. We had to stop the horrors in Millwood to prevent anyone else from falling victim to the cannibal family and their dark rituals. On the fifth morning of our stay in the cabin, Ren shook me awake, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," she whispered urgently. We grabbed what we could and fled into the woods. I could hear the sounds of pursuit behind us, shouts and the crashing of undergrowth as the cannibals closed in. My heart pounded in my chest as we ran, branches scratching at our skin and the uneven ground threatening to trip us at every step. The forest seemed to come alive around us, shadows deepening and branches reaching out like grasping hands. Was it just my imagination fueled by fear and adrenaline, or was there something more sinister at work? I remembered the talk of an ancient evil, and for a moment I could almost believe it was real and aiding our pursuers. Just when I thought we were done for, the trees thinned and we broke through onto a road. A car was approaching, and I waved frantically, desperation giving me strength I didn't know I had left. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind face, slowed to a stop. His eyes widened as he took in our appearance, dirty, bloodied, and wild-eyed with fear. "Please," I gasped. "We need help. There are people after us." Without hesitation, he opened the doors. "Get in," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. We scrambled into the car and he sped away, just as our pursuers emerged from the tree line. I watched in the rearview mirror as the feral man howled in rage, shaking his fist at our retreating vehicle. As we put distance between us and Millwood, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But I knew this wasn't over. The horrors we had witnessed, the evil we had encountered, it couldn't be allowed to continue. Our rescuer, who introduced himself as Deputy Samuel Thorne, listened in stunned silence as we recounted our ordeal. At first I could see the disbelief in his eyes, but as we provided more details and he saw the extent of my injuries, his expression hardened into grim determination. "I've heard whispers about strange goings-on in those woods," he said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Hikers gone missing, strange lights and sounds, but nothing like this. We're going straight to the sheriff's office." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. At first, the local authorities were skeptical of our story, but Deputy Thorne vouched for us and the evidence we provided. My injuries, Wren's testimony, and the detailed information we could give about the layout of the house and the surrounding area was compelling. A task force was assembled and a raid was planned on the house in the woods. I insisted on going along, much to the concern of the medical staff who had been treating me, but I knew I had to see this through to the end. The raid itself was both anticlimactic and deeply disturbing. The cannibal family didn't put up much of a fight when faced with overwhelming force. We were captured alive, raving about the sleeper, the rituals they had to perform, but what we found in that house would haunt me for the rest of my life. The remains of countless victims, some recent, others decades old, journals detailing generations of atrocities, and deep beneath the house in caverns that seemed to stretch for miles, we found evidence of something that defied explanation. Ancient carvings covered the walls, depicting a monstrous entity and human worshippers. There were chambers filled with bones arranged in intricate patterns and deep pits that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The official report would label it all as the delusions of a family of inbred cannibals, their rituals nothing more than the products of diseased minds. But those of us who saw it firsthand knew there was more to the story. Something had been sleeping beneath Millwood, something ancient and hungry. And while we may have stopped its servants, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of a much larger mystery. In the months that followed, I struggled to adjust to normal life. The nightmares were frequent and vivid, filled with images of sharp teeth and ancient hungry entities. But slowly, with the help of therapy and the unwavering support of my sister, I began to heal. Rena was placed in foster care, but we kept in touch. She was resilient, adapting to her new life with a strength that amazed me. We'd been through hell together, and that created a bond that couldn't be broken. The cannibal family was tried and convicted, their crimes too numerous and horrific to result in anything but multiple life sentences. A house in the woods was demolished, the caverns beneath it sealed off and buried. But late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows seem to move of their own accord, I can't help but wonder, is it really over? Or is something still sleeping beneath the earth waiting for new servants to awaken it? I loved Millwood and never looked back. The experience changed me, but I refused to let it define me. I was a survivor, and I was determined to live my life on my own terms. Yet a part of me knows that my journey isn't over. There are other dark corners in the world, other ancient evils waiting to be uncovered. Then if the time comes to face them, they'll be ready. For now, though, I cherish each day as it comes. I've learned the hard way that life is precious and fragile, and while the road ahead may be uncertain, I face it with a strength I never knew I had. A strength forged in the fires of unimaginable horror and tempered by the will to survive. The sun was just peeking over the eastern horizon as I pulled my patrol car onto Main Street. Huntsville was still asleep, the only signs of life being old Mr. Jenkins shuffling to open his hardware store and then the aroma of fresh coffee wafting from Joe's diner. I smiled to myself, appreciating the quiet beauty of our little Montana town. My name is Conrad Hensley, and I've been the sheriff of Huntsville for going on 15 years now. It's not a glamorous job by any means, but it suits me just fine. At 35, I'm content with my life here, just me and my daughter Zoe, keeping the peace in a town where everyone knows your name and your business. I parked the cruiser in front of Joe's and stepped out, inhaling deeply. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine from the nearby forests, mixed with the promise of another hot summer day. As I pushed open the diner's door, the bell jingled cheerfully. "Morning, Conrad." Joe's booming voice greeted me from behind the counter. He's a big man with a bigger heart, his ruddy face creased with laugh lines. The usual I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "You know me too well, Joe," he chuckled, pouring me a steaming cup of black coffee. "How's little Zoe doing?" "Not so little anymore, I reckon." A proud smile tugged at my lips. "She's growing like a weed. 12 going on 20, I swear. Smart as a whip too, just like her mother." A shadow passed over Joe's face at the mention of my late wife, Sarah. It had been 5 years since the car accident that took her from us, but the pain was still fresh for many in town who had loved her. "Sarah would be proud of you both," Joe said softly, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak for a moment. Clearing my throat, I changed the subject. "Anything exciting happening in town I should know about?" Joe laughed, a somber moment passing. "Exciting?" "In Hartsville. Well, Mrs. Peterson's cat got stuck up a tree again yesterday." "Does that count?" We shared a chuckle. This was Hartsville, where a cat in a tree was front page news, and that's exactly how I liked it. As I finished my breakfast, the radio on my belt crackled to life. "Sheriff Hensley, come in." I unclipped it and brought it to my mouth. "Go ahead, dispatch." "We got a call from Mrs. Winslow out on County Road 7. She says her husband, Harold, didn't come home last night." I frowned. Harold Winslow was a retired schoolteacher, a creature of habit if there ever was one. Him not coming home was unusual, to say the least. "Tell her I'm on my way," I replied, standing up and leaving some bills on the counter. Joe raised an eyebrow. "Trouble?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Probably nothing. Harold probably lost track of time tinkering in that shed of his again." As I climbed into my cruiser, a nagging feeling settled in my gut. Something about this didn't sit right. In a town like Hartsville, where the routine was as predictable as sunrise, any deviation stood out like a sore thumb. Little did I know as I pulled away from Joe's diner and headed towards the Winslow place that this seemingly ordinary missing persons call would be the beginning of a nightmare that would shake our quiet town to its very core. The Winslow place was a tidy farmhouse about 5 miles out of town, surrounded by fields of wheat that swayed gently in the summer breeze. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I saw Martha Winslow already waiting on the porch, wringing her hands anxiously. "Oh, Conrad, thank goodness you're here," she said as I approached, her voice trembling slightly. Martha was in her early 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, worry lines etched deeply around her eyes. "Mrs. Winslow." I nodded, trying to keep my tone reassuring. "Tell me what happened." She took a shaky breath. "It's Harold. He left yesterday afternoon, said he was going to the old Miller farm to look at some tools Frank Miller's kids were selling off. But he never came home. I frowned. The Miller farm had been abandoned for years, ever since old Frank passed away and his children moved to the city. Did you try calling him? Martha nodded vigorously. Of course, but it goes straight to voicemail. That's not like Harold at all. He always answers his phone. I made a few notes in my pocket notebook. When was the last time you heard from him? Around 4 p.m. yesterday. He called to say he was running late and would be home for dinner by 6, but he never showed up. Her voice cracked on the last words. I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Mrs. Winslow. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. I'll have it at the Miller farm right now and check it out. As I drove towards the Miller property, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Harold Winslow was a creature of habit, punctual to a fault. Then while coming home or answering his phone was completely out of character. The old Miller farm loomed ahead, a dilapidated 2-story farmhouse with peeling paint and overgrown fields stretching out behind it. I parked my cruiser and got out, the crunch of gravel under my boots seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. Harold, I called out, my voice echoing across the empty yard. No response. I made my way toward the large barn to the side of the house. Its red paint had faded to a dull rust color. The door was slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, the hinges creaked ominously. Harold, you in here? The interior of the barn was dim, with dust mites dancing in the few shafts of sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. Old farm equipment cast strange shadows, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay. Then I saw it, a hand protruding from behind a stack of old crates. My heart racing, I rushed over, already knowing what I would find, but hoping against hope that I was wrong. Harold Winslow lay sprawled on the dirty floor, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. A pool of dried blood spread out from his head, and nearby a heavy wrench lay discarded, its metal surface dark with blood. Dispatch, I spoke into my radio, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. I need backup and forensics at the old Miller farm. We've got a homicide. As I waited for backup to arrive, I surveyed the scene, my mind racing. This wasn't just a tragic accident, this was murder. And suddenly our quiet little town didn't feel so safe anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The barn, once silent and forgotten, now buzzed with the efficient movements of the forensics team. Camera flashes lit up the dim interior like lightning, capturing every grisly detail of the crime scene. I stood off to the side, watching as Detective Laura Finney from the county led the investigation. Laura was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a mind like a steel trap. She'd been called in to help with the case, given that Harsville hadn't seen a murder in over 2 decades. What do you think? I asked her as she approached, snapping off her latex gloves. Laura's brow furrowed. It's not good, Conrad. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Whoever did this, Harold probably knew them. I nodded grimly. The idea that someone in our tight-knit community could be capable of such violence was deeply unsettling. Time of death, I asked. I put it between 4 and 6 p.m. yesterday, Laura replied, consistent with when he was last heard from. As the body was carefully removed and taken to the county morgue, Laura and I began a thorough search of the barn and surrounding area. We found Harold's car parked behind the barn, out of sight from the road. So he definitely made it here, I mused. But why? Was he really here to look at tools? Laura shook her head. No sign of any tools for sale that I can see. This whole setup feels off. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields, we had to call it a day. But the questions kept swirling in my mind as I drove back to town. Who would want Harold Winslow dead? And why? The hardest part was yet to come. I had to break the news to Martha Winslow that her husband of 40 years was never coming home again. As I pulled up to the Winslow house, I saw Martha still sitting on the porch, hope dying in her eyes as she realized I was alone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to do. "Mrs. Winslow," I began, my voice gentle. "I'm so sorry." Her anguished cry pierced the quiet evening, a sound of pure heartbreak that would haunt me for years to come. News of Harold Winslow's murder spread through Hartsville like wildfire. By the next morning, it was all anyone could talk about. I walked into Joe's diner for my usual breakfast and was immediately bombarded with questions. "Conrad, is it true?" Joe asked. His normally jovial face creased with concern. "Harold Winslow was murdered?" I nodded grimly, accepting the coffee he handed me. "I'm afraid so, Joe," I said. "We're doing everything we can to find out what happened." The diner was unusually crowded for a weekday morning, filled with worried townsfolk seeking information and reassurance. I could feel their eyes on me, looking to their share for answers I didn't have. But who would want to hurt Harold? Mrs. Peterson, our town librarian, asked. He was such a kind man. I sighed, choosing my words carefully. "We don't know yet, but I promise you, we will find out." As I left the diner, I could hear the murmur of conversations, fear and speculation running rampant. Hartsville had always been a safe place where people left their doors unlocked and kids played freely in the streets. Now that sense of security was shattered. At the station, Laura and I pored over the evidence we had gathered. Crime scene photos were spread across my desk, each one a grim reminder of the violence that had invaded our town. "Anything from the autopsy report?" I asked, rubbing my tired eyes. Laura shook her head. "Nothing we didn't already know." The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The murder weapon was definitely the wrench we found at the scene. I nodded, my gaze falling on a photo of Harold's personal effects. Something caught my eye. "Wait, what's this?" I pointed to a crumpled piece of paper partially visible in Harold's jacket pocket. Laura leaned in for a closer look. "Good catch," she said, quickly locating the actual paper in our evidence bags. She carefully unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note. "Meet at Miller Farm, 4 p.m. Come alone. CB." Laura and I exchanged glances. "CB?" I'm used to it. What do we know with those initials? We spent the next few hours combing through town records looking for anyone with the initial CB who might have had a connection to Harold, but we came up empty. As evening approached, I headed home, my mind still racing with possibilities. I found Zoe at the kitchen table, her homework spread out before her. "Hey kiddo," I said, giving her a quick hug. "How was school?" Zoe looked up at me, her blue eyes, so like her mother's, were filled with worry. "Dad, is it true what everyone's saying about Mr. Winslow?" I sat down beside her, my heart heavy. How do you explain something like this to a 12-year-old? "Yes, honey, I'm afraid it's true. Mr. Winslow was killed." Zoe's eyes widened. "But things like that don't happen here, right, Dad?" I pulled her close, wishing I could shield her from the harsh realities of the world. "Usually they don't, but I promise you I'm gonna find out who did this. You're safe, okay?" As I held my daughter, I made a silent vow I would find Harold's killer no matter what it took. For Harold, for Martha, for Zoe, and for all of Hartsville, our peaceful town deserved nothing less. The next few days passed in a blur of interviews and evidence analysis. Laura and I talked to what felt like every person in Hartsville, trying to piece together Harold's last movements and any potential motives for his murder. We learned that Harold had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his death. Several people mentioned seeing him engaged in hushed conversations with strangers in town. Mrs. Peterson at the library recalled Harold spending hours poring over old town records and land deeds. It was odd, she told us, adjusting her glasses nervously. He seemed agitated, like he was looking for something specific, but he wouldn't say what. As we dug deeper, more questions arose. Harold's bank records showed a large withdrawal of cash just days before his death. His cell phone records revealed several calls to an unlisted number in the weeks prior. One evening, as Laura and I were reviewing our notes at the station, Deputy Tom burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Sheriff Detective, you need to see this," he said, brandishing a file folder. Inside was a property record for a small cabin just outside of town, purchased 6 months ago by a man named Clyde Berryman. CB, Laura and I said in unison, exchanging meaningful glances. We wasted no time heading out to the address listed. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, barely visible from the road. As we approached, it was clear that no one had been there for a while. Weeds had overtaken the small clearing, and the cabin itself looked run down. "Clyde Berryman," I called out as we neared the front door. No response. Laura tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Exchanging a nod, we drew our weapons and entered. The interior of the cabin was a mess. Papers were strewn everywhere, empty food containers littered the floor, and a musty smell permeated the air. But what caught our attention were the walls, which were covered in photos, newspaper clippings, and scribbled notes, all connected by red string in a complex web. At the center was a large map of Hartsville with several locations circled in red, including the Miller farm. "What the hell?" I muttered, taking in the chaotic display. Laura was already examining the papers closely. "Conrad, look at this," she said, her voice tense. She pointed to a list of names. Harold Winslow's name was at the top, crossed out in red. Below it were other names, more prominent citizens of Hartsville. A chill ran down my spine as I saw my own name near the bottom of the list. "Whoever this Clyde Berryman is," Laura said grimly, "he's not done." As we continued to search the cabin, we found more disturbing evidence, detailed schedules of the people on the list, including their daily routines, blueprints of buildings around town, and a journal filled with rambling, paranoid Darians about a great conspiracy in Hartsville. We spent hours documenting everything, our sense of unease growing with each discovery. It was clear we weren't dealing with a simple murder anymore. This was something much bigger and more dangerous. As we finally left the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "We need to find this Clyde Berryman," I said to Laura as we got into my cruiser, and fast. She nodded, her face grim in the fading light. "Agreed, but Conrad, be careful. Your name is on that list too." As we drove back to town, my mind raced. How could I protect a whole town from a threat we barely understood? And how could I keep Zoe safe if I was a target myself? The quiet streets of Hartsville suddenly seemed full of shadows, each one potentially hiding a killer. Our peaceful town had become a battleground, and the war had only just begun. The discovery at Clyde Berryman's cabin changed everything. We put out an APB, but it was like chasing a ghost. No one in town had ever heard of him, and we had no photo to go on. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air, leaving only chaos in his wake. Laura and I worked around the clock, trying to unravel the twisted web Berryman had woven. We assigned deputies to protect the people on his list, but with limited manpower, it was like trying to plug a dam with our fingers. The atmosphere in town grew tenser by the day. People eyed their neighbors with suspicion, wondering if the killer could be hiding in plain sight. Parents kept their children indoors, and the once bustling streets became eerily quiet. 1 week after our discovery at the cabin, it happened again. Frank Miller, the former owner of the farm where Harold was killed, was found dead in his home in the city. The method was the same: blunt force trauma to the head. "It's not a coincidence," Laura said as we stood over Miller's body. "Berryman's escalating." I nodded grimly. "But why these people? What's the connection?" We dug into Frank Miller's background, looking for any link to Harold Winslow beyond the obvious connection of the farm. It was Zoe who inadvertently provided a clue. I had been poring over old records at home when she peered over my shoulder. "Hey, I know him," she said, pointing at a photo of a young Frank Miller. "You do?" I asked, surprised. Zoe nodded. "Yeah, he's in that old photo at school, the one with all the founding families of Hartsville." It was like a light bulb went off. I rushed to the school, and there it was, a large faded photograph hanging in the main hall. It showed a group of stern-faced men and women standing in front of the newly built town hall. The plaque beneath read, "Founding Families of Hartsville." In there among the faces were younger versions of both Harold Winslow and Frank Miller's grandfathers. "The founding families," I breathed, quickly snapping a photo with my phone. That's the connection. Back at the station, Laura and I compared the names in the photo to Berryman's list. Every single name on his list was a descendant of Hartsville's founding families. But why, Laura asked, frustration evident in her voice. What could have happened over 100 years ago that would lead to this? Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Joe from the diner. His voice was panicked. "Conrad, you need to get down here now. Someone left a package for you." My blood ran cold. "Don't touch it, Joe."
I'm on my way.
The diner was eerily empty when we arrived, save for a nervous-looking Joe behind the counter. On my usual seat was a small brown paper package. The bomb squad cleared it. There were no explosives. Inside, we found a single sheet of paper and an old rusted key. The note read, "The sins of the father shall be visited upon the son. Miller Farm, midnight. Come alone if you want answers. CB." I stared at the words, my mind racing. This was it, a chance to end this nightmare. But it was almost certainly a trap. "You can go alone," Laura insisted when I told her my plan to meet Berryman. I shook my head. "We don't have a choice. If I don't go, hell just keep killing." As midnight approached, I prepared myself. I hugged Zoe tightly before leaving her with a trusted deputy, trying to memorize every detail of her face in case it was the last time. The old Miller farm was bathed in moonlight as I pulled up. The decrepit buildings cast long shadows across the overgrown fields. My hand rested on my gun as I stepped out of the cruiser, every sense on high alert. "Berryman," I called out, my voice echoing in the still night air. "I'm here." The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the abandoned Miller farm as I cautiously approached the old barn. My footsteps crunched on the gravel, sounding unnaturally loud in the still night air. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but I pressed on, determined to end Clyde Berryman's reign of terror. "Berryman," I called out again as I neared the barn door. "Show yourself." A chilling laugh echoed from inside the structure. "Ah, Sheriff Hensley, right on time. Please, come in. We have much to discuss." Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the creaking barn door. The interior was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And there, standing in the center of the barn, was a man I assumed to be Clyde Berryman. He was tall and gaunt, with wild eyes that gleamed with feverish intensity. In his hand he held an old leather-bound book. "Welcome, Sheriff," he said in a voice unnaturally calm. "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." I kept my hand near my holstered gun. "It's over, Berryman. We know about the cabin, the list. Why are you doing this?" He laughed again, a sound devoid of any real mirth. "Why? Because justice must be served. Your precious town, your founding families, they're built on lies and blood." Berryman held up the book. "This journal belonged to my great-grandfather. He was there when Hartsville was founded. He saw what really happened." As he spoke, Berryman's movements became erratic. "The founding families didn't build this town. They stole it. murdered for it. My ancestors, along with others, were the original settlers. But your ancestors wanted the land for themselves, so they slaughtered them all, burned the evidence, and rewrote history. I frowned, trying to process this information. Even if that's true, bury men. It doesn't justify murder. Harold, Frank, they weren't responsible for what happened over a century ago. No, Berryman shouted, his calm facade cracking. They benefited from it, lived their comfortable lives on stolen land, built with stolen lives. The debt must be paid. Suddenly, he pulled out a gun, aiming it squarely at my chest. And you, Sheriff Hensley, you're the last descendant. With your death, the scales will be balanced. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. In that split second, I drew my own weapon and fired. The sound of gunshots echoed through the barn. Berryman staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he collapsed to the ground. The old journal fell from his grasp, landing open on the dirt floor. As I approached cautiously, my gun still trained on him, I saw the life fading from his eyes. With his last breath, Berryman whispered, "The truth, it's all in there. Read it." And then that is gone. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Maura and the forensics team combed through every inch of the barn and Berryman's cabin. As claims about Hartsville's dark founding were investigated, leading to the uncovering of long-buried town records that corroborated parts of his story. The revelation shook our community to its core. Families that had taken pride in their heritage for generations were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The town was divided between those who wanted to acknowledge this dark chapter of our history and those who preferred to let sleeping dogs lie. As for me, I found myself grappling with my own family's role in these events. The weight of this knowledge, combined with the stress of the recent murders, left me feeling lost and uncertain. It was Zoe who helped me find my way. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with wisdom beyond her years. "Dad," she said softly, "we can change what happened in the past, but we can decide what to do now, right?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "You're right, kiddo. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and make things better going forward." In the weeks that followed, I worked with town leaders to establish a committee aimed at acknowledging our town's true history and finding ways to make amends. It wasn't easy, and there was resistance, but slowly Hartsville began to heal. The murders of Harold Winslow and Frank Miller would always be a dark chapter in our town's history, but from that darkness, a new understanding emerged. We were no longer a town living in blissful ignorance of our past, but one actively working to right old wrongs and build a more just future. As for me, I continued my role as sheriff, but with a new perspective. Every day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. And every night as I hugged Zoe before bed, I was reminded of what truly mattered, not the sins of the past, but the promise of tomorrow. Hartsville would never be the same quiet, carefree town it once was, but perhaps in confronting our demons and facing the truth, we had become something better. A community willing to acknowledge its flaws and work towards redemption. The crisp Montana air bit at my skin as I stepped out onto the porch of my family's cabin. It was early September 1998, and the leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in vibrant hues of red and gold. I took a deep breath, savoring the scent of pine and wood smoke that always reminded me of home. My name is Warren Standing Bear, and I've lived in this small town nestled in the Rocky Mountains my entire life. Our community is tight-knit, mostly comprised of members of the Blackfeet tribe, with a few non-native families scattered about. We live a simple life, one deeply connected to the land and our traditions. I was just about to head out for my morning run when I heard the phone ringing inside. Stepping back in, I picked up the receiver. "Warren, it's Aunt Marie. Have you seen Jesse?" The worry in her voice was immediately apparent. Jesse Black Elk, my cousin, was known for his extended hunting trips, often disappearing into the woods for days at a time. But he always told someone where he was going and when he'd be back. "No, I haven't," I replied. "A knot forming in my stomach." "When was the last time you saw him?" 4 days ago, he said he was going to check some new hunting grounds, but he should have been back by now. This isn't like him, Warren. I assured Aunt Marie that I'd gather a search party and start looking for Jesse right away. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Within an hour, I had assembled a small group of myself, my childhood friend Sam White Eagle, and my uncle Tom Two Moon. We were all experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the terrain and the potential dangers of the wilderness. As we gathered our supplies, food, water, first aid kits, and our hunting rifles, I briefed the others on the situation. "Jess has been gone for 4 days," I explained, checking the ammunition in my rifle. "He mentioned new hunting grounds, but didn't specify where. We'll start with his usual routes and fan out from there." Uncle Tom, his weathered face creased with concern, nodded grimly. "The spirits have been restless lately. We must be cautious." Sam, always the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. "Knowing Jesse, he's probably found some secret fishing spot and lost track of time. We'll find him swapping stories with the trout." I appreciated Sam's attempt at humor, but couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. As we set out into the forest, the usually welcoming trees seemed to loom over us, their shadows deeper and more menacing than I remembered. Little did we know, our simple search and rescue mission was about to turn into a nightmare that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The forest welcomed us with its familiar symphony, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant gurgle of the stream. Under normal circumstances, these sounds would have been comforting. Today they felt like a mask, hiding something sinister beneath. We started on the trail Jesse usually took, calling out his name every few minutes. Our voices echoed through the trees, meeting only mocking calls of crows. "Jesse, Jesse, can you hear us?" As the day wore on, the forest seemed to grow quieter. Birds fell silent and even the wind died down, leaving us in an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. By late afternoon, we found ourselves in an area none of us recognized. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted into unnatural shapes. Thick undergrowth clawed at our legs as we pushed through, and more than once I could have sworn I saw something move just at the edge of my vision. "This ain't right," Uncle Tom muttered, his eyes darting from tree to tree. "We shouldn't be here." Sam wiped sweat from his brow, his earlier optimism fading. "Maybe we should turn back, try another route tomorrow." I was about to agree when something caught my eye. There, on a nearby tree, was a marking, 3 parallel lines carved deep into the bark. "Hold up," I said, moving closer to examine it. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Uncle Tom came over, his face growing pale as he saw the marking. "No," he whispered, "but I've heard stories." Before he could elaborate, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our flashlight beams. We all froze, straining our ears. For a moment there was nothing. Then a low guttural sound echoed through the trees, not quite animal, not quite human. "We need to make camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Then I'll quickly set up our tents in a small clearing, building a fire more for comfort than warmth. As we sat around the flickering flames, the forest seemed to press in around us, the darkness beyond our little circle of light feeling almost solid. "Uncle Tom," I said quietly, "what were you going to say about those markings?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and grave. "They were old stories, passed down through generations. Stories of a creature that lives in these woods. The elders call it the Wendigo, spirit of hunger and winter, of cannibalism and insatiable greed." Sam scoffed nervously. come on, those are just stories to scare kids. All stories come from somewhere, Sam, Uncle Tom replied. And in these woods, the old ways still hold power. As if in response to his words, that inhuman sound echoed through the forest again, closer this time. We all jumped, instinctively moving closer to the fire. Well, take turns keeping watch, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. First light, we move out. As the others settled into an uneasy sleep, I took the first watch, my rifle across my lap. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, each rustle of leaves, each crack of a branch setting my heart racing. It was during my watch that I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of our campsite. A tall, gaunt figure, barely visible in the gloom. Its eyes caught the firelight for just a moment, glowing with an unnatural, hungry gleam. I blinked, and it was gone. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained. What had we gotten ourselves into, and more importantly, what had happened to Jesse? Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange that seemed at odds with the oppressive atmosphere of the forest. None of us had slept well. Our dreams were plagued by shadowy figures and inhuman cries. As we broke camp, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us spinning around, rifles at the ready. The forest that had once been our home now felt alien and hostile. We need to keep moving, I said, studying our map. There's an old trapper's cabin a few miles north of here. Maybe Jesse took shelter there. The journey was tense, our nerves were frayed by lack of sleep and growing fear. The markings we had seen the day before appeared with increasing frequency, 3 parallel lines carved into trees, rocks, even the ground itself. It's like a trail, Sam muttered, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim acceptance. It's leading us somewhere or hurting us, Uncle Tom added ominously. Following day, we reached the cabin. It stood in a small clearing, its windows dark and empty, the door hanging off its hinges. The wood was weathered to gray, covered in a thick layer of moss and lichen. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Jesse, I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive silence. No response. We approached cautiously, rifles raised, the floorboards creaked ominously under our weight as we entered. The interior was dark and musty, thick cobwebs hanging from every corner. Debris littered the floor, broken furniture, scraps of paper, animal bones. Spread out, I said, look for any sign of Jesse. We searched the cabin methodically, but found no trace of my cousin. What we did find, however, chilled me to the bone. In what must have been the bedroom, the walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of tally marks as if someone had been counting the days, and interspersed among them crude drawings of a tall skeletal figure with antlers and glowing eyes. Warren, Sam called from the other room, his voice shaking. You need to see this. In what was once the kitchen, we found a table. Faintly a map of the surrounding forest marked with the same 3-line symbol we had been following. One spot deep in a part of the woods I had never explored was circled repeatedly in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. We should go, Uncle Tom said, his face ashen. This is no place for us. As we turned to leave, a sound froze us in our tracks, a low, rattling breath coming from just outside the cabin. Then slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. We raised our rifles, aiming at the door. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the others could hear it. The footsteps stopped, just outside. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a long, pale hand with unnaturally elongated fingers wrapped around the edge of the doorframe. Run, I yelled, and we bolted for the back door. As we fled into the forest, I caught a glimpse of our pursuer, a tall, emaciated figure with antlers sprouting from its skull and eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. The Wendigo had found us, and the hunt had begun. Our feet pounded against the forest floor as we ran, branches whipping at our faces. roots threatening to trip us at every step. The creature's footsteps thundered behind us impossibly fast for something so large. "Don't look back," I shouted, my lungs burning with each breath. "Just keep running." But human endurance is no match for a supernatural predator. I could hear it gaining on us, its rattling breath growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly Sam stumbled, crying out in pain as he fell. I skidded to a halt, turning back to help him. "Go, Sam yelled, his face contorted in fear and pain. "Save yourselves," but I couldn't leave him. I ran back, grabbing his arm to haul him to his feet. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The Wendigo loomed over us, its body a nightmarish fusion of man and beast. Skin pulled tight over an emaciated frame, ribs protruding grotesquely. Its arms were unnaturally long, ending in hands with razor-sharp claws, but its face was the stuff of nightmares, sunken glowing eyes above a mouth filled with needle-like teeth stretched into a perpetual hungry grin. It reached for Sam, its claws inches from his throat. Without thinking, I raised my rifle and fired. The shot rang out deafeningly loud in the quiet forest. The Wendigo recoiled more in surprise than pain, and I used that moment to pull Sam to his feet. "Run!" I yelled again, and we took off. Uncle Tom was already ahead of us. We ran blindly with no destination in mind beyond escape. The forest blurred around us, trees and shadows melding into a nightmarish landscape. The Wendigo's howl echoed behind us, a sound of rage and hunger that chilled me to my core. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless flight. But eventually we burst out of the trees into a small clearing. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, each carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "In there," Uncle Tom gasped, gesturing to the stone circle. "Its sacred ground might protect us." We stumbled into the circle, collapsing onto the ground, our chests heaving as we gulped in air. For a moment all was quiet, except for our ragged breathing. Then, the Wendigo appeared at the edge of the clearing. It paced back and forth, its glowing eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity, but it didn't enter the circle. The old magic still held. We watched in terrified fascination as the creature circled us, letting out occasional shrieks of frustration. Its movements were uncanny, sometimes fluid and graceful, other times jerky and insect-like. As night fell, we huddled together in the center of the stone circle, watching the Wendigo prowl. None of us dared to sleep, fear keeping us alert despite our exhaustion. "What do we do now?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the creature that had once been human, wondering what could have turned it into such a monster. And I thought of Jesse, hoping against hope that he hadn't met a similar fate. "We wait for dawn," I said. "Then we find Jesse and get the hell out of these woods." But as the night wore on and the Wendigo's hungry eyes remained fixed on us, I couldn't shake the feeling that dawn might never come. The night stretched on endlessly, each minute feeling like an hour as we huddled in our stone sanctuary. The Wendigo never left, its glowing eyes fixed on us with predatory patience. It knew we couldn't stay in the circle forever. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Uncle Tom spoke, his voice low and grave. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Something I should have told you before we entered these woods." Sam and I turned to him, our faces etched with exhaustion and fear. "The markings we've been seeing, the ones leading us here," Uncle Tom continued. "I've seen them before, years ago when I was about your age." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "There was a man in our tribe, a shaman named Grey Wolf. He was obsessed with the old ways, gaining power over the spirits. One day he ventured into these woods and didn't return. When we searched for him, we found those markings." "What happened to him?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "We never found him," Uncle Tom replied. "After that, people started disappearing. Hunters would go into the woods and not come back. We all knew something was out there hunting us. The elders called it the Wendigo. But what does this have to do with Jesse? Sam asked. Uncle Tom's face was grim. Jesse had been asking questions, researching old stories. I think he might have been trying to find Grey Wolf's cabin to uncover the truth. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You think Jesse knew about this? That he came out here on purpose? Before Uncle Tom could answer, a blood-curdling shriek split the air. The Wendigo was on its feet, its body contorting in impossible ways as it paced the edge of our sanctuary. The protection is weakening, Uncle Tom said, his voice tight with fear. We need to move now. As if on cue, the Wendigo lunged forward, its claws scraping against an invisible barrier. Cracks appeared in the air, like shattered glass, and I knew our time was up. Run, I yelled, and we burst out of the circle just as the Wendigo broke through. We fled into the forest, the creature's howls echoing behind us. But this time we had a destination, Grey Wolf's cabin. If Jesse had been there, maybe we'd find answers. Maybe we'd find him. As we ran, the forest around us seemed to shift and change. Trees appeared where none had been before, paths vanished and reappeared. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, trying to confuse and disorient us. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into a clearing. On the center stood a cabin, similar to the one we'd found earlier, but somehow wrong. The angles were off, the windows like distorted eyes, the door a gaping maw. This is it, Uncle Tom gasped. Grey Wolf's cabin. As we approached, I noticed something carved into the door, a familiar symbol of 3 parallel lines. With a sense of dread, I pushed the door open. The interior was dark, lit only by shafts of sunlight streaming through cracks in the walls. And far in the center of the room was Jesse. He was alive, but barely. His body was emaciated, his eyes sunken and feverish. When he saw us, he let out a weak cry. Warren, you shouldn't have come. You don't know what you've done. As I rushed to his side, I heard the creature's screams shriek in the distance, closer now, and I knew that our nightmare was far from over. The cabin creaked and groaned around us as I rushed to Jesse's side. He was barely conscious, his skin pale and clammy. As I helped him sit up, his eyes focused on me, filled with a mix of relief and terror. Warren, he rasped, his voice weak. You don't understand. The hunger is everywhere. What happened, Jesse? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. What did you find out here? Before he could answer, Uncle Tom called out from across the room. Warren, Sam, you need to see this. We turned to see Uncle Tom standing in front of a wall covered in papers, photographs, and strange symbols. It looked like the work of a madman, lines connecting seemingly unrelated items, scrawled notes in the margins. Grey Wolf's research, Uncle Tom muttered, his eyes scanning the wall. Sam moved closer, examining a weather journal lying open on a nearby table. Listen to this, he said, reading aloud. The hunger is the key. Embrace it and gain unimaginable power. Resist and be consumed by it. A chill ran down my spine as Jesse spoke up behind me. I thought I could control it, he said, his voice filled with regret. I thought I could use the power to protect our people, but I was wrong. So wrong. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek echoed from just outside the cabin. The Wendigo had found us. We need to go now, I shouted, helping Jesse to his feet. But as we turned to leave, the door burst open. The Wendigo stood there, its emaciated form filling the doorway, those glowing eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity. In that moment, Jesse broke free from my grip. He stood facing the creature, his body trembling. I'm sorry, he whispered, and then lunged at the Wendigo. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Jesse and the creature grappled, their forms seemed to blur together. There was a flash of light, a howl of pain and triumph, and then silence. Where two beings had stood, there was now only one. It looked like Jesse, but his eyes glowed with that same unnatural light, his fingers elongating into claws. "Run!" Jesse's voice came from the creature's mouth, strained as if fighting against itself. I can't hold it back for long. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran from the cabin, our hearts pounding. The sound of an inhuman howl followed us into the forest. The forest was a blur around us as we ran, branches whipped at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, we could hear the creature that had once been Jesse crashing through the underbrush. Its howls were a mixture of hunger and anguish. "We need to split up," Uncle Tom gasped as we ran, confused. Buy us some time. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. We had no chance of outrunning this thing as a group. "Say you go west," I said between breaths. "Uncle Tom, east. We'll keep going north. We'll meet back at the village." We separated, each disappearing into the dense forest. I could hear the creature behind me, its footsteps thundering, getting closer with each passing second. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear kept me moving. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling and sliding until I splashed into icy water. A river hidden by thick underbrush now rushed around me. I struggled to keep my head above water, the current threatening to pull me under. Behind me, I heard the creature's roar of frustration. It stood at the top of the embankment, pacing back and forth, unwilling or unable to follow me into the water. The river carried me swiftly downstream, away from the monster that had once been my cousin. As the sound of its howls faded into the distance, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. I had escaped, but at what cost? Eventually, I managed to grab onto a low-hanging branch and pull myself onto the riverbank. I lay there for a moment, coughing and gasping, my body trembling from cold and exhaustion. As I caught my breath, I realized I recognized where I was. The river had carried me close to the edge of the forest, near our village. I was almost home. With renewed energy, I pushed myself to my feet and started walking. Every shadow made me jump. Every sound had me spinning around, expecting to see glowing eyes and sharp claws, but nothing came. As I emerged from the trade line, I saw the lights of the village in the distance. I had made it. But what about Sam and Uncle Tom? I stumbled into the village, my clothes torn and muddy, my body battered and exhausted. People rushed to help me, their voices overlapping as they asked what had happened and where the others were. Before I could answer, I heard a shout. Sam emerged from the forest on the other side of the village, looking as ragged as I felt. Our eyes met, and I saw my own relief mirrored in his face. But Uncle Tom was nowhere to be seen. The next few days passed in a blur. Search parties were sent out, but there was no sign of Uncle Tom or Jesse. I told our story over and over, to the tribal elders, to the police, to Jesse's parents. And I could see the doubt in their eyes. Who would believe a tale of ancient spirits and men turning into monsters? Weeks turned into months. Uncle Tom and Jesse were officially declared missing, presumed dead. Life in the village tried to return to normal, but there was an undercurrent of fear. No one ventured into the forest alone anymore. As for me, I couldn't shake the memories of what I'd seen. Every night I dreamed of glowing eyes and twisted bodies, of hunger that could never be satisfied. I woke up screaming, the echo of the Wendigo's howl ringing in my ears. Sam and I talked about it sometimes, late at night, when the weight of our secret became too much to bear alone. We wondered if we could have done something differently, if we could have saved Jesse. We wondered if Uncle Tom was still out there somewhere, lost in those cursed woods. A year after that fateful trip into the forest, I stood at the edge of the tree line, staring into the shadows between the trees. Part of me wanted to go back in to search for answers, to find some kind of closure. But as I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the distance, barely audible, I heard a sound, a low guttural growl that was not quite animal, not quite human. I turned and walked back to the village, my heart pounding. The forest had taken enough from us. Some secrets I realized were better left buried. Some hungers could never be satisfied. But in the years that followed, on quiet nights when the wind whispered through the trees, I could swear I heard it. The howl of the Wendigo, a sound of endless hunger and eternal loneliness. And I knew deep in my bones that the horror we had encountered was still out there waiting in the dark heart of the forest.